My name is Mayor Scott Fogel. I'd like to welcome everybody to tonight's West Milton Council meeting. This is a special meeting. Tonight is June 27th, 2017, 7:30 p.m. If I could ask everybody to please stand in the room. We'll say the Pledge of Allegiance first. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Before we have roll call, I'd like to entertain a motion to excuse Council Member Don Dorman. He is not here. He's on vacation. So moved. Second. Roll call, please.
Hurst? Yes. Pop? Yes. Miller?
Yes.
Trudy? Yes. Tinnerman?
Yes.
And Mayor Fogel?
Yes. Okay. Tonight's meeting is a public hearing for the proposed incentive district TIF for the Stillwater Crossing Development. Before I open up the meeting, I wanted to give a little bit of ground rules and explanation of how the public hearing will occur. We'll open up the public hearing. I'll turn things over to Manager Klein for a few words. We have several special guest speakers in reference to the development and some specifics with that. Then we will open it up for council members for any questions or comments that the council members would have before the speakers and the folks that are here with the development. And then we will open it up to the public for any comments from the public. And after that, we will conclude the meeting or the public hearing, and we will move into our original workshop. So at this time, I'll open up the public hearing for the proposed incentive district TIF for the Stillwater Crossings Development, and I will turn the floor over to Manager Klein.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, good evening. Guests, good evening. Welcome. It's nice to see a room full. We're here tonight to fulfill a requirement by the Ohio Revised Code to hold a public hearing on the proposed Stillwater Crossings development. I'm just going to take a minute just to describe what Stillwater Crossings is going to be. Tom, if you could put up a map for me. No, not that one. The big green one. There we go. Stillwater Crossings is located on 571, on the corner of 571 and Iddings. Iddings is on as you're looking at the map, it'd be on the far right. Up on top is 571. It's across from the river. It's approximately 100 acres. Will compose of commercial activity along 571. Some of the proposed uses would be possibly a gas station or a car wash. There'll be a couple strip centers with some restaurants, coffee shops. Those are the goals. And then when the further west or to the left that you go, you might see a sizable building that's a proposed medical center. And then to the far left would be both an assisted living facility, along with that we're proposing and leaving some room for what's called a skilled nursing facility. Just to the south or around the large building of assisted living would be senior condos or senior cottages. They would be members of and would have the enjoyment of being able to participate in the assisted living, but they would be independent units. Those who want to downsize, looking for a grow-in place, and close to some senior health care facilities. And then the remainder of it shows about approximately 133 single-family homes, is what you see on the bottom of the map. Tonight, and that's the proposal. Now, all of this will be reviewed again, and I invite all of you again to attend the July 11th council meeting. All of that will then be, we'll have a public hearing for the development itself, which is to rezone this area. But this is essentially the information that we'll be sharing with you also in the July 11th meeting. Now, tonight is regarding what's called a TIF. TIF stands for tax increment financing. I'm not going to delve into it. I've got experts that will describe all of that. But tonight, it's required, there are going to be two types of TIF. Go ahead, Tom. Show me that first map that you brought up. Well, okay. That's the second map. The first map that he showed was outlined in red, and that was what was called a, there we go. That's going to be what's called a commercial TIF. That will be where the businesses and these assisted living and everything is going to be. Now scroll back to the other one, please. Tonight, our public hearing is in regard to this area, which includes the proposed 133 single-family houses. And it's my pleasure to introduce Caleb Bell, who's one of the leading experts in the state of Ohio in regards to TIFs. Caleb.
Thank you, Matt. I think I'll come over here so I can see everybody. Yes, thanks. I'm a partner with River Network Law Firm. I work out of Columbus. I've been hired by the village in order to assist council and municipal manager with this program. And as Matt was indicating, TIF, tax increment financing, is a legal mechanism available under state law for municipalities to really address new development. It's a tool that's intended to focus on new, not existing. So when development occurs in a community, obviously there is additional demand. There are things like roads, sewer, water, infrastructure development, could be parks, could be retention basins, all kinds of costs that are associated with the development. In order to take control, municipalities essentially, they want to manage the way in which that infrastructure is put in place. They want to do arrangements with developers that are proper, that create a proper bargain between the government and the private sector. And so TIF is a mechanism that's used to accomplish many of those goals. What TIF does is it essentially is a tax redirection mechanism. There's a lot of ways that we think about property tax in Ohio. Property taxes, we all pay them on our either escrow through our mortgage or in our regular property tax bill that we might get. And what TIF does is essentially keeps that same process in place. Everybody pays. Here, I'll hold it. Yeah.
That's for our television audience, really.
No problem. So TIF. Essentially, with TIF, everybody pays what they would have paid. The property tax billing process is no different. The county will continue to assess properties. The county will continue to bill properties for property taxes. So to the folks who will live in this area and to the businesses that will own property there, it's no different for them. They'll continue to pay the regular property taxes that the auditor will assess on them. The mechanism, what TIF does, is it allows the auditor, when they are settling accounts with all the different jurisdictions that receive property taxes, to set up a special fund with West Milton, so West Milton can take a portion of the taxes that would have been paid on that extra value, that new value, and segregate it and put it into an infrastructure-specific fund. So this legal mechanism that we're talking about is essentially, it's an infrastructure funding mechanism for the village. Why does it work? Why has it worked in the past? It's seen as, it's again, a redirection of the new. All of the existing taxes on the land, let's say, that are out there right now that are being paid to all the jurisdictions, they'll continue to be paid to the taxing jurisdictions. Nobody loses as a result of there being new development. What happens is there's more taxes paid, more property taxes. Each one of those homes will have a value. Taxes will be paid on that new value. The businesses will have a value. Taxes will be paid on those. Right now, it's farmland, and there's not a lot being paid. So the new creates essentially a pie that can be used by the village to implement the infrastructure. So generally, that's what's going on. Matt mentioned that there are two types of TIFs. There's a commercial TIF and the incentive district TIF. The commercial TIF is what it is. It is what it means. It means it's exempting the new value related to commercial properties. So properties that the auditor of the county assign commercial classification to. So that would be the assisted living facility, for example, or the retail centers, that kind of property. versus the residential site. That's the second map, the site where the single-family homes will be. Obviously, the auditor classifies those as residential properties. There are many, many types of TIFs under state law. These two do two different things. The key distinction is the residential. The residential TIF is a little different because of the nature of residents. Residents are obviously where a lot of the demand comes when you provide government service. So things like the county levy agencies, the school district, other jurisdictions, they rely on, obviously, the property taxes paid by homes. So this TIF, this incentive district TIF, will result in there being property tax diversion, but not from the schools. So the end result here is what we call a non-school TIF. This TIF does not redirect any money that would otherwise go to the schools, and that makes sense. People may have kids who live in these homes. There's no intention to divert funds from the schools as a result of this program. Same with the commercial side, although that's not the focus of today's hearing. The commercial side is also non-school, so that there would not be any diversion from the schools over there. So TIF is kind of an intricate tool. There's a lot of history with it. I mean, we're happy to answer questions about it. But again, the big picture is two types of TIFs. The incentive district TIF, the residential TIF. It's a little more technical, and obviously there's a lot more scrutiny that goes on surrounding residential properties. But again, these are the things that I've been advising the council and the municipal manager.
Why don't you enter?
Now and then yeah, we'll go ahead. You good? Yeah. Yeah.
Good evening, Andy Brochard with Bradley Payne Advisors. We're the municipal advisor on the transaction. We met with you, I forget how long ago it was. We went over some of the TIF numbers. What they asked me to do today was to talk about a couple things, where we were at back a few months ago.
Tom, go ahead and put up that other slide, please.
And then highlight where we're at with the revenue generation from those parcels, and then talk about also the debt service that we're going to be covering on the site. So up there on the screen, and if you got really good eyesight, I'll walk through this. But back on the left side is where we had some numbers generated. And by the way, this is going to change. It consistently changes as the development continues to occur. There's some opportunity that I know that the developer is looking at that is not in the numbers right now. So those numbers could grow. But this is what we know as of today, and as you see there, as of April 1st, that's not April Fool's Day joke, but that's what we knew back on April 1st as to the revenues that were going to be, the values we were going to use. You can see there with the Randall building, 11.5, that really hasn't changed. The medical office building has shifted in value from $7 million over to $8 million. Likewise, the commercial has gone down from 13 to 11.8. And the duplex is probably the biggest shift along with the residential. The duplex, which is the senior living cottages that were spoken about, went from 12 million to a little over $15 million. And then finally, single family homes. That's the one that's going to shift as well. We used back in April 1st, I think it was around 190,000 an acre or a house, somewhere in that nature. We went conservative on this, and we're using 180 tonight, as you see the numbers today, because we want to show that even at 180, we still cover on a conservative viewpoint relative to the debt service that's going to be needed to cover the public improvements. So that's a little bit about the valuation on top.
Can I ask you real quick?
Yes, sir.
My eyesight isn't good enough to
Yeah.
see that far. What is the difference in that number between single-family home then
It went from
and now?
27.7 down to 23.9.
Thank you.
So overall, with the site, as of right now, given those shifts, we went from 71.2 back in April to $70.3 million in valuation assumptions.
Okay.
Okay? So down below, we have, again, this is a big, it's a little bit complicated because we also have an abatement period with the properties. So there's an assessment in the first 15 years, and then the TIF picks up in later 15 years on both the residential and the commercial. Now, the residential, the abatement doesn't go for 15. I think it's 4 years from when the site's constructed. But as you see there, the revenues, these are the revenues in its second batch of columns there. What is generated over time during the TIF for each one of those assets. So the Randall Building, for example, is projected at $5,150,000. And as of right now, we're looking at that to produce about $5,287,000. What changed? The millage rates. Some of the millage, when the new millages came out this year, we updated that, and it obviously has an impact relative to the dollars that will be generated over time. And again, that will continue to change as values go up, millage rates get rolled back, but this is just a snapshot in time today. You can see the medical office went up about $200,000. The commercial complex obviously went down by $400,000 in total revenues generated. The duplex, as we talked about, went up from the valuations that were created. A single family is at 5.2 compared to the 4.3. And again, that's really related to the millage associated with it, the taxing rate, and then the 5 mil assessment charge. As you can see there, we still have included on the site, generates as of right now about $1,190,000.
Is that, and I don't want to keep interrupting you in between, but is that 5 mil assessment based on residential or residential and commercial?
I believe we do we have it on our, it was just residential, I'm sorry, yeah,
Okay.
thanks. It's been a while since. So the other thing that changed down below is the debt service requirements. And again, keep in mind, the village is not issuing this debt. This is going to go through, as of right now, we've held discussions with the Montgomery County Port Authority, and they would be the issuer. So the village would transfer the revenues over when they're collected by way of agreement to the Port Authority, and then the Port Authority would be the issuer of the debt. There's not a liability from the village if there's a default scenario, all right? The other option, if we also been talking to the Warren County Port Authority, but we'll filter that out as we move along through the process. Back in April, we had broken this up into 3 different bond components. And you can see there the total debt service. You actually pay a little bit more as we push debt out and the phases out. And as of right now, the last number run, we went with have a little bit more being issued up front, but the model supports that, and a little bit in terms of one less issue and not so much debt service out further and more interest costs being generated or incurred. We're at 23.2 in debt service repayment. The first phase, we are looking at utilizing what they call a bond fund structure, which would buy down the interest rate, which would be very important and obviously keep the cost down. Just so everybody's aware, we took a really conservative viewpoint on that second phase, and we used a 6% interest rate. So obviously, it's 2.5% higher than what we're currently contemplating with the bond fund. That could be a possibility again. We just didn't want to assume that off the bat, that phase 2 would also be a bond fund deal. It could be, but we went the conservative route. So, trying to make sure I covered everything in our notes as to relative to the changes. Do you have any questions at this point in time?
Okay, so with just a quick question, with the abatement and the assessment, that is for the first 15 years.
Right.
And after that,
On the commercial.
on the commercial, after that ends, then the commercial TIF will kick in after that.
That's correct. That's we call that the overlay, the commercial overlay.
Okay.
So the assessment is really going to be equal to what they would have paid in taxes on, even though it's abated. So they'll have an assessment for 15 years. It actually, quite frankly, it helps us with our security on the bond issue. It helps us better because of the guaranteed nature of an assessment compared to a fluctuation in a TIF revenue. But that's going to be the way that the commercial will work. The residential will be for the first 4 years, and then it flips into the residential TIF.
Okay. And then that TIF goes for 15 years as well?
Actually, it would go for the remaining balance of the 30 years.
Okay.
So in essence, the first set of homes would then be out there for 26 years in a
Okay.
residential TIF.
So be under the TIF for the 26 years
That's
after
correct.
the 4-year abatement?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to clarify one point, Mr. Mayor, the TIFs the TIFs relate to both the land value and the building value. The abatements only relate to building value.
Good.
So
Okay.
abatements only ever abate building value. Any land value increases may be running during the period of the abatement
Okay.
in the TIFs. So the TIFs are 30 years, 4 and then 30, 15 and then 30. And so there may be land value increases that generate some revenue,
Okay.
even during the period of the abatement.
Great, thank you for the explanation.
Is that why you run the TIF and the abatement together? In other words, not one after the other, but the clock starts on them at the same time in the beginning because of the difference of the building valuation and the land appreciation and the taxes that might generate?
Generally, yes.
Okay.
It would be very unusual to start a TIF, let's say, 4 years in the future or 15 years in the future when you're authorizing it today.
Okay,
So for bond security purposes, everybody wants to know that the public process is complete when the bonds are issued. They're relying on the revenue.
Okay.
So it's important to have all of these entitlements and these programs authorized at one point in time. That's
Okay.
why we do them at the same time. We do them at the same time so that it's all done, and the mechanisms will take over by operation of law later.
it happens automatically.
That's right.
But they are at the same time and not a 15-year abatement followed by an additional 30 years
No.
of TIF.
Yeah, correct.
So you're looking at a 30-year structure,
Correct.
not 45.
Correct.
Okay.
Who sets the value, or the values of building and the land? Is that through the auditor's
The
office?
county auditor's office will.
And who will set the value of that building? Let me rephrase that. How do they determine that, the value of that building? And can that change throughout the period of the TIF?
Okay, yes. Yes, it can change. So valuation is variable. It goes up and goes down. When the market declines, sometimes the auditor will remove value because of market decline. We saw that happen in 8, 9, 10, 11.
Right.
What the auditors will do in order to assess value is they will evaluate construction projects going on in the county. They will have surveyors who are essentially hired guns by the county auditor's office to go and evaluate the actual value. They'll measure things like square footage and percent of completion in order to reach a valuation. They'll do that in a modified way of what they might do for your and my home, where they take comps.
Yeah.
They'll try to find comps for commercial properties. It's a little easier to do that in residential. So that's a process that the auditor's office will go through.
And so I'm sorry,
No, go ahead.
so the sale prices, prices aren't necessarily representative of the auditor's evaluated price.
That's correct.
So going back to, I believe you said in your figures that you were looking previously around 190,000 at valuations for homes.
Yeah. I think that's
And what are your numbers based on now?
right. We're using the 180 numbers, that line item in there today.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that would be sale price or auditor's valuation price?
We're just using an estimated valuation price right now. So the sales price could be higher than that.
Okay.
In reality, right now, we're just using 180 as our model number.
Okay. What I'm trying to make sure of is where that number needs to be for the debt repayment structure.
Yeah. I think what you have here today is showing you that at 180, we're good
Okay.
at this point in time. Keep in mind on the valuations on the commercial side, if we have another crisis like we did 3 years after this is all built and things are moving along, the valuation at that point in time doesn't matter on the commercial side because we have an assessment that's locked in at a dollar amount.
Okay.
So the commercial side is less risky relative to the debt repayment within that first 15-year period. Thereafter, yeah, it would matter because valuation fluctuations would impact your TIF revenues. They would have an impact on the residential side because we only have a 4-year abatement period. And then after that 4-year abatement period, we're subject to fluctuations on the revenue stream relative to the value of that house.
From the auditor's valuation?
From the auditor's valuation.
So the
that's correct.
first 4 years, you can assess the value as you see fit?
Well,
within reason.
yeah, I mean,
Okay.
what we're going to do is say, hey, this house would have typically paid $5,000 in taxes, just making up a number.
Okay.
That's what the assessment will be going forward for the next 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have another question about the residential. When we first were talking about this development, the home prices were estimated to be somewhere between 215 and 300. And I think when we talked about that, then that would, of course, pay off the debt a lot sooner as
Yeah.
well because of that. Now things have changed a little bit, so I'm kind of concerned with that because even when we met with Ryan Holmes, they were higher. I thought they were more at the 210 or higher range. Now, I know the abatement for the 4 years, I think that dollar amount cutoff is 250. Is that right, Matt?
I believe so.
For the abatement for the 4 year? Is it anything under 250 per our
Yes.
For residential.
ordinance for residential?
So if a house was over 250, it would actually be 8.
Then it would go to 8. So I guess what I'm just trying to understand is why things change so drastically with the prices or the estimated amounts of the homes that were going to be built in that area
Yeah.
and being brought down further. I'm just trying to
Let me speak to the model.
understand that in my
Yeah,
head.
I'll speak to the model, and somebody else had to speak to the valuations of the homes.
Okay.
Because I don't control that. But when we first started with this project, and there was that $210,000 to $300,000 range, we always used the 210 number. I think also along with the build-out, I got yelled at because, not really yelled at, but they didn't like my build-out numbers because I went pretty conservative. And I was told, well, they're going to build this out faster than that. And I said, well, I don't care. We're going to make this a slower build-out. So we were always using a 210 number.
Okay,
And in fact, I think I showed you a 210 number earlier this week, and then we went down to 190 to show what it would we still need to be to cover debt service. And really, the 180 is just there to show, hey, this is kind of where we're at as this starts to get a little bit skinnier relative to our debt coverage ratios. But you're right, anything above that would then, sort of that previous conversation, I think that first night we met, those revenues would then go in to help pay back that debt sooner as the values grow. And I'll double check. I don't think, we're pretty conservative with these numbers. I don't think we put a valuation increase every reappraisal and update year. So I think we kept that at 0 as well, just to make sure we had a conservative nature to the values.
So then, when will we find out the value of these homes?
Yeah.
Will that be through Ron here, or?
Yeah, it's not a question
Okay.
I can answer, but.
Okay. Just wondering.
Yeah, that is a development-driven parameter. So what you're hearing from, the two of us is the tail does not wag the dog. The bond model must assume a lot of conservative assumptions. If the development is producing at a better level, if there's higher valuations per home, that's good. That's something that will help every bit of the situation. But we can't assume that on the front end. What our job is to put together legal and financial mechanisms that are very conservative. If the development and Ryan Holmes are able to substantiate higher values, they will, as business folks, I would think, follow that instinct. So.
Okay, thanks.
Can you just mention the third-party administrators who would be overseeing the TIF and overseeing the auditor's work?
Of course. What Matt's mentioning is a third-party administrator. So in projects like this, which involve abatements as well as TIF revenue, and there's some variability in the TIF revenue, there's variability in tax rates and variability in the valuations of the residential and commercial. What you have is a situation where there needs to be some smoothing of that variability in order to ensure that debt service is satisfied each year. So typically, projects like this have what's called an administrator. The administrator's job is to track the individual valuations of the individual parcels, compare that with the auditor's records to ensure that the revenue production is accurate so that the taxes are being paid and distributed correctly. And that they're flowing to the bond model correctly. With there being a special assessment in this transaction, there would need to be a setting of the special assessment each year to ensure that the following year, when the auditor actually when the auditor puts it on the bill and it gets paid, that the special assessment is sufficient to pay the debt service. So these projects don't just stop when the bonds are issued. There tends to be a bit of management of the tax system. And oftentimes, the county auditor's office, they don't do that in the vacuum. They do that with third-party professionals who will monitor the tax system as it goes all the way through to the final payment of the bonds or when the bonds can be paid off early.
Who would that third-party administrator, who would that be?
That would be a professional. There are many. So there are law firms like myself that have them. There are companies that are nationwide that do this type of activity. Sometimes it makes sense to use folks who have been in Ohio because Ohio's tax collection system is unique. We tax in arrears. We do certain things differently. There are 88 ways of doing things in Ohio because there's 88 county auditors and they all have different ways of getting it done. So there are a number of professionals that can be used for that, and that's something that we would collaborate with the Montgomery County Port Authority, as there's a need for the issuer of the bonds to have a legal relationship with that entity, whoever it is.
Understand. Okay, thank you.
And who pays for that third-party assessment?
So that is an ongoing expense of the bond model. So what you'll see in Andy's bond numbers are expenses for the issuer. Each year, the issuer has disclosure that they need to make to the market. That's an expense of the issuer of the bonds. The trustee for the bonds, who's actually servicing the payments, there's an expense there. The administrator is another type of expense like that. So in these projects, typically there's very known dollar amounts that are plugged into the actual contract, the bond contract, when it gets issued.
So the TIF repays for the
Correct.
administration,
The TIF and the
administrative
assessment
fees?
together, yes.
Okay. Based on your financial figures that you're showing, I just want to make sure I'm following right. The total debt service requirements says the $23,251,768.
Yeah.
That's the projected amount that will be, what, raised by property taxes or?
That's the projected amount that will have to be repaid back over the life of the assessments in the TIF districts.
So that would be covering the initial costs or
That's
the infrastructure cost?
Yeah.
Essentially the interest rate that goes along with that, the cost of the debt?
Cost of the debt, it covers a period of interest carry until we have the tax revenues, as Caleb mentioned, is in arrears. And so we've got sometimes a year and a half, 2 years after a project's completed until we actually have revenues coming in. There's sometimes a requirement in the investing world for a 1 year of debt service held in cash that's funded out of the bond proceeds. And then all the fun people involved, the expenses of that adds up, with projects like this, that's covered in there.
Okay.
So everything that we see with these transactions that would be a cost is associated, is covered in that bond, either in the upfront cost or over time as the administrator would be paid each year. The bank trustee, all those types of fees would be in there as well.
So then would it be safe to say that out of that 23 million, you could kind of back figure how much of that is the actual infrastructure cost that you're projecting?
I think I've got that number with me here if you want. Is that what you'd like to know, is what the dollar amount we use to get back to that number?
I don't necessarily need them all today, but eventually I'd like to know what all those numbers break down to.
Yeah, and
what
so
the
we are also
administrative cost
still
is, the
kind of
carry,
running
the-
through, so phase one, it net funds project cost is $7.2 million
Net fund, you're meaning what you're spending on the infrastructure?
on the infrastructure, right?
Okay.
So it's not the gross amount of the bond that'll be issued, but that's what would be put into what we call the project fund for the cost of the project at that
Okay.
point in time. In phase two, right now, we're running at a little over $4 million. And, as I said before, I guarantee you those numbers will change as we start to get actual bids in. Ron and I were talking just before the meeting. These are conservative numbers. We want them to be on the high side to start off with, and hopefully they come down significantly.
So what would phase 3 be?
We don't have a phase three right now. We've got phase one. Phase one, I think, kind of took a little bit of phase two, and then compared to the first set of numbers, if you see that. We had those split out in 3 phases. Under the current scenario, we're just doing 2 bonds.
So that would be a estimated, $11.2 million of infrastructure?
Yeah, roughly, right.
Okay. What is the total TIF, following that it's 23 and a quarter for the repayment, but what is the TIF itself? If we have 11.2, what are we financing, and in a sense? What's our mortgage?
From TIF itself, or, well, we're generating 27.7 of assessment and TIF revenues.
Okay,
So it's a combination of that assessment for 15 years on the commercial, 4 years on the residential, and then the overlay TIFs relative to the residential and the commercial TIF. So that generates a total of the 27.7 to pay back that 23.
okay.
We can get
That's
you the split out
Not
if
quite
you
where I was
want it.
going, but with that, the difference, what, $4.5 million?
Yeah,
Where does that excess go?
that is built up in the fund that would be held at the bond trustee, who's receiving all these payments and paying the debt service.
Okay,
Sometimes, depending on who the buyer is, we can have acceleration clauses where excess revenues could go to pay down debt service sooner. I mean, that's a possibility. If my numbers are completely wrong and these values go through the roof, you have more revenues coming in, you keep on paying down that debt service sooner, and you get out of this faster.
so does the TIF, and this is probably your question, does the TIF, it's been my understanding that TIFs don't necessarily end early, but that you can begin to redistribute money once the debt is paid off as though it was normally distributed.
Yes. So, under the Ohio TIF law, the general rule is that the TIF is, the fund, which is the money that gets assigned to the bond trustee, that fund, can be used for public infrastructure expense. Bond debt service and all of those expenditures that we've talked about related to the bonds are all eligible expenditures from the TIF. But let's say you've covered the bond debt service, you've made your way through amortizing that debt. If there's any money left over in the fund, the law says there's really two things that can happen. One, the municipality can just simply terminate the TIF. Any excess money in the fund is general fund money of the municipality at that point in time.
Okay.
The second is municipality could identify additional infrastructure improvements that benefit or serve the areas that have been exempted in the first place. So let's say you come back over 15 years or 20 years from now after, the values are good and we've paid off the debt early, you can put additional park, road, road maintenance, road items, that kind of thing, can come back in and be eligible expenditures of the TIF. Some communities are also entering into agreements with other taxing jurisdictions to find ways to, essentially contribute some of this diverted TIF money to those. So here, you might think of the county, let's say, where some of this money would have otherwise been county levy money. It's possible that at the time that you paid off the bond debt, some type of contribution or donation is made to the county in respect of their diverted levies. Again, that's a choice that's made after the bond is paid for because the bondholders are going to want to claim. They want to first claim on all that money.
Sure.
And so even these reserve systems get put in place to soak up the money as it's generated every year. So these choices don't typically get made now. They get made later after you're able to determine, hey, we could pay off our mortgage fast. So now we have a little excess cash flow. What should we do with it? That is a choice you can defer to the future.
I would assume that by paying the bonds off early, that would end the administrative fees as well?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. But to get back to my question I had before, if we're looking at phase 1 and phase 2 of $11.2 million, but we have a debt reservice, a debt repayment cost of $23.25 million, where's the other $11 million? What is the other $11 million going to?
It'd be interest.
Yeah, interest.
It'd be the analogy is the truth in lending form that you get when you
That's what
sign
I'm
on your
looking for.
mortgage.
Yes.
You've got a $200,000 mortgage, but you're going to pay $545,000 to the bank over 30 years because you're paying the bank not only the principal but also the interest. That's essentially the same concept here.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Andy, what was the value that was used for the senior cottages? I know you used 180 for the single family. What was the amount that was used for the senior cottages?
We were using 12 million, and now we're at 15,120.
Okay. What was the price for like each individual unit?
I'd have to get that to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there 20 of them there? Is that what I'm seeing on the
I
map?
think it's more than that now. It's 30,
Well, what's that?
80 units.
But they're quads, right? So you'd have, you said 80 total units
So,
to 20 buildings?
gotcha.
So you're,
My math does about 180,000 per.
You said 180?
Yeah, 187 actually is what I have.
per building or per unit?
Per unit.
Okay,
All I did was take 15 million divided by 80.
that's what I was looking for.
187 per unit. Okay. 80 units, 20 buildings. Council, any other questions for Andy or Caleb?
I have one. Will the TIF money be used either as a reimbursement or to directly purchase the land?
I don't believe that's in the model.
I don't believe it is. I think it's right away, maybe right away only.
So it would be normal for road right-of-way, the cost of road right-of-way, which would become a public asset to be paid for. That's typically a small fraction of the overall, but there's no contemplation that the whole swath of land would be paid.
So you're saying it's not being contemplated, but not that it couldn't happen, right?
It's possible that you could use TIF money to acquire land if there are appropriate purposes associated with the land. Here, I think that the only contemplated purpose is road right-of-way
Right.
for land.
That's the only thing I've seen so far.
Caleb, I think this would probably be for yours. We were given, Matt gave us some information about TIFs and some, it listed seven different types of TIFs
Yes.
on here. I'm assuming this would be either a municipal incentive district or a traditional municipal?
Yes, so the commercial TIF is what we would call a traditional municipal TIF. That's also known as a parcel TIF. So the revised code 570940B is the parcel TIF for municipality. And those are the TIFs that are unique to all of the individual, retail or commercial uses. And if there are 4 or more units in a structure and they're rented, that is treated as commercial as well. So these pinwheel condo units really aren't condos, they're apartment units under law. Under the way that the auditor assesses those, they'll be treated as commercial. That's why the district is drawn in such a way to include those in the commercial. The second type is the incentive district TIF. That's 570940C instead of B. And that's the one that would exempt the residential.
And
now.
residential. I'm good for now.
So I got a question then in reference to the incentive district TIF for the residential and the traditional municipal TIF for the commercial. So do we have to have 2 separate pieces of legislation for both of those? Or will those be combined together when we create the TIF district, since they're different?
Yeah, I recommended that you do them as 2 separate
Okay.
because of the way in which the statutes work. It is much easier to carve off and delineate the fund associated with residential versus commercial. So.
Okay, great, thank you.
I just want to, are there other parts of presentation? I don't want to get ahead of myself with questions or ask things that you might be
No,
answering later. Is there other things that
I'm-
you're going into or Ron is going into or?
I'm done with my side of it unless you got other questions, and I can answer those now.
They were here to describe everything, just as they did.
Okay.
It's under our, for a public hearing, that's what they've done. This is what's being projected. This is what a TIF does. This is how it works. This
Okay.
is why we use it.
Okay,
It's really to answer all of your questions and the audience's questions.
okay. Yeah, I have some more then.
Okay,
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
I wasn't
Once I
done.
sit down, I'm done,
Okay, so if council has no other questions?
No, I do.
Oh, Jason, you do?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, let me see where I'm at. So I also want to make sure, I understand we're a little unusual in the way that we're setting up a TIF that in a normal circumstance, the village would be paying for the infrastructure and paying ourselves back for the infrastructure being put in. We would be responsible for the debt service and the bonds. And in this case, the developer is taking on that responsibility. So at no point can that responsibility of financial obligation come back to the village?
Yes, so you're correct that this TIF is not the traditional style of tax increment financing where the municipality incurs the expense directly and then obtains reimbursement. The municipality has the power to issue debt. You could issue bonds on your own, but you'd also have the responsibility of pledging a tax behind it. And so in order to avoid this from being a debt of the municipality, many projects are structured in this fashion where this is essentially a developer risk. The TIF requires the developer to install the infrastructure in the ground, and they would be entitled to reimbursement. Here, the developer, the municipality, and the bond issuer are entering into contracts, agreements that cause that risk that is borne by the developer to be shifted to the bond market. So the bond market assigns an interest rate in respect of that risk. So the bond market and the issuer fundamentally are the parties who are responsible for repaying the debt. That responsibility of the issuer, the Montgomery County Port Authority, is limited to your fund. You have no responsibility beyond putting money in the fund that you get from the county auditor. So this is a limited obligation revenue bond, not a general obligation bond with a tax behind it. So that's kind of how we sort through that under state law analysis. Not a general obligation, no tax pledge. This is instead a special obligation because it's limited to the fund into which these TIF service payments are put.
Okay. Now, we were also talking about adding, I'll call them the village's add-ins or add-ons to this TIF and using the TIF to finance some of the infrastructure, such as a water tower, things of that nature. Are we responsible for those items within the TIF? Are those going to be separated out, or will all of that fall back to the developer?
The answer is it depends on the way in which the municipality negotiates agreements with the developer. So if there were a requirement that the municipality imposed on the developer for, let's say, a water tower or additional traffic curb cuts or additional items that are not in the developer's pro forma, it's possible that you would be able to charge that to the developer. However, that will drag the bond model because there's more costs associated with it. So there is clearly a business relationship being identified between the municipality and the developer. I'll tell you some of the things that Andy was starting to mention about what happens with the excess revenue. Those can flow into funds. Some bond models can have release mechanisms where if there is a certain debt coverage satisfied and there's certain reserves that are put in place, there's no reason why the municipality couldn't then access the additional TIF funds because you've already satisfied all of the bondholders' requirements for proper security and proper coverage of the debt. At that time, that additional fund could be a mechanism by which the municipality could use to finance something. So you could use that fund, and the money's projected to go into there to pay for a water tower, a park, additional infrastructure that supports this area.
But since we're looking at doing those things in the beginning, how are we structuring this? What is our agreement between us and the developer at this point for responsibility of repayment of debt for our add-ins?
We do not have an agreement yet.
Okay.
All it is we, the village, have the ability to acquire zero interest funds from the state of Ohio for certain infrastructure projects. One could be a new water tower or a pump station. We've been approved for almost $1 million, 0% interest, 30 years. My guess would be we would negotiate with the developer that we're going to have, if we would sign on and take that money, it's better than 4% or 6% or 5% or whatever that development's facing. So it'd have to be a contract between us and the developer that we would take on that, but he would have to pay back based off the proceeds to us every year to pay back that 30 years.
And what if our expenses exceed the $900,000? Would we be adding to the cost of
It would
the
only
TIF
be
as well?
it would only be a contract as to whatever we're eligible for. So it's, right now, it's $971,000, which has been granted to us, but we've not signed any paper to accept it until we would have an agreement. And the only, again, the only logic behind that was to not pay 4, 5, or 6%, but the
Sure.
developer paying 0%. That's all.
When can we expect to see this language of the TIF and how it's being written?
Actually, this Thursday.
Okay.
I have it, put the form now, to our form, and I just literally printed it, so you'll have it in a packet this Thursday afternoon.
Will we be receiving any type of a list of, an itemized list of what this infrastructure is and how much it's going to cost?
Yeah.
That's included in the ordinance.
Yeah.
Okay. And then if, I'll give a scenario that maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong with some of the things included in the development, but the roundabout, the entrance signs, I've heard of talk of cleaning up the hillside along 571 just to make it more presentable. Am I on track with that?
That would be my hope. It's a nice-looking corridor that could be developed, yes.
Okay. So would those things be broken out in that itemized list of the expense that is expected to cost? And
I have to defer
Is
to
that-
him, yeah,
okay.
on that listing.
will that be broken out individually? of
Not
what-
individually, no. In fact, you should have received that language in your packet on Friday, which was a description of all the public improvements.
Okay. But it won't be itemized as to what they're going to provide and at what cost? What my concern is that if construction costs for the infrastructure of roads, curbs, gutters, sidewalks exceeds the estimates, that there will be cutbacks in other areas to make up for that. And so what I'm interested in making sure is that in our development agreement, there are certain things being promised to be done, and irregardless of what that cost may be, that they're going to be covered. So in other words, I don't want to lose certain aesthetic aspects of this development just because the pipe costs more or we ran into more rock. I need to know who's responsible for that additional cost before we can go into this.
Well, I mean, we have a development agreement that includes the rezoning of the land, which in our particular case, in this particular case, is not rezoning it B3 and R1 or whatever. It's rezoning it what's called planned development. And based on our code, when you approve the plan, you've approved the development as presented to you. Now, if there's any, what would be called a major change, that would have to go through the entire process all over again, starting with the planning board.
Are those details explained within that development plan? Not just roads, curbs, gutters, and sidewalks, but the additional things, the aesthetic values that are being put into the development? Are they going to be detailed out that those will be carried through as well? Therefore, if they aren't done, that they would have to come back to us for a rezoning?
It's not to my understanding that, I mean, we haven't selected stone for the gateway, or it's not that detailed,
I'm not
no.
looking for that much detail, but I don't want to see the gateway disappear because the cost of sidewalks was higher than expected.
I understand what you're saying. It's not detailed to that nth degree, no.
Can we have it detailed to that nth degree?
Be up to the,
Yes.
Okay. That's an easy answer, thank you.
We're using Choice One as our engineer.
Mhm.
They will be finalizing the entire plan sometime in late July. We met with them Monday last week, and so we'll have the plans actually done so we can go out to bid on everything. I believe I have estimated everything a little on the high side because I had to. I don't think that Andy's gonna be able to sell these bonds unless he's got the detailed numbers as well, I would think. So all the landscaping, we're gonna be using Siegenthalers out of Dayton to be doing all our landscaping. We met with Choice one day last week. So you need the details, I need the details, Andy needs the details, and so does Caleb. So I just can't give them to you today, okay?
That's fine. What, so we can expect those when?
In August, I would say.
Okay.
But we're gonna go out to bid on everything and get everything finalized.
Actually, we need to have that by the end of July. You'll need them in your hands by the end of July because everything is set for an August 8th meeting.
End of July, huh?
Well, I'm not gonna say we're gonna have final bids by the end of July.
Right. No, it has to be final plans.
These are
Okay.
budget numbers.
Sure.
And, so I'm anticipating things will come down. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
And Matt, just to confirm, those are the 8 bulletized items that are on the economic development plan that you gave to us, is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So another concern that I have with this is I don't see anything that caps the amount of infrastructure that can be spent on the project. And I've been given the answer to this point that the market will only bear a certain amount of infrastructure debt because the tax revenues will only pay back a certain amount of infrastructure debt. And while that makes sense to me, I've also seen the property values drop from 215 to 300 to 180. So where is that cap? Where is that market answer? I'm not comfortable with the market setting the cap on the infrastructure cost at this point. Is there a reason why we can't have a cap for what is being spent on infrastructure built into the TIF? If there's an estimated $11.2 million of debt being put in, I'm not even looking to nail it down to the dime, but can it be set at 11.5, 12 million?
We can, but I mean, the problem I think with that is if your project, for whatever reason, would grow,
Okay.
for a good reason, because you've got another building coming in, then you just cap yourself if you have more expenses associated with that growth. That's one reason why I would say, as long as the expenditure is legitimate and allowed under state law and the TIF law. But outside of that, I mean, we can't sell debt at a 1-to-1 coverage. So,
I'm not following that.
meaning revenues can't equal the debt service.
Okay,
We've got to have
sure.
25% more revenues coming in, or somebody's going to say, listen, I'm not interested in that deal.
Right.
We're in the process, I had a meeting up in Columbus on Monday relative to the financing. We're in the process of that, we call the bond fund transaction that we talked about before. That's going to help us determine really, again, if values stay where they're at, where we need to be on expenditures. Other than that, I mean, it's a policy decision. You can cap it if you like, but that's not my, suggestion at this point in time unless you think it's a good idea, but.
Legally, you may cap it.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are a number of practical reasons, as Andy has mentioned, that it may not make sense, especially when the expected size of the project is still variable, because your cap may be out of, say, the project size. So you may be inadvertently, hedging your bets too much, right? You may be artificially limiting your own, benefit from the project. We wouldn't want to have a cap going into a revenue bond scenario and then have a lot of value get created, actually get the $300,000 homes, and then it's trapped. The revenue gets trapped by the bond model because of the cap and the other restrictions that are going to flow with it. So it's a spider web. If you pull on that one, you've got a number of other implications. But there are many transactions that I've done around the state where we have instituted absolute caps. I think the distinction between those projects and these are this project has a little less definition in the valuation side, which is creating a little uncertainty about where the line would be.
And while I understand your scenario of potential growth elsewhere, or the difference between a higher valuation of homes, I'm not seeing where that would change the cost of the infrastructure to go in. We're looking at, right now on the map that he had up there,
Yeah.
basically filling this property. It's not as though there's 40 acres sitting off to the side that's not being planned for. So
Yeah, I mean, I think.
right now, we're looking at utilizing the entire space, and it's not as though if there's additional commercial interest in the property, that we're doing anything to help them with that. We're
Right.
supplying the water spout for them. And so I don't see where our cost structure changes. I guess we'll get to the bottom line.
Yeah.
I'm uncomfortable writing a blank check to someone and saying,
Right, and I
"Please
understand
don't
that. I mean, I
overspend."
think there's ways you can address that, where you could come back, that you've got a set amount of improvements that you've approved.
Okay.
Anything above that has to come back to council for approval.
Would that be in scope or in dollar figure?
You got me there, right? There's all different ways you can run this as, to make yourself feel comfortable with what's going on. I've just seen in my 19 years with these TIF districts, when you write them too tight, you regret it later on.
Okay.
Because, let's say the values of the homes come in at $300,000. Ron brings another medical office building that's even larger. You've got other infrastructure needs in the area that the community may want to do. Yet, in the legislation where you authorize this, you've tied your hands to a certain dollar amount and you're done.
Or to a certain scope.
Or to a certain scope, correct.
And then you can't use it for the other scope without modifying, and modification would require consent of somebody outside this room, the bondholder. And then you've got a problem, because you don't control, that person is gonna want first claim on all that revenue. So they're not gonna be, they're not gonna have the same incentive that you would have to use the money, so.
I see what you're saying in terms of the expenditure side of this, but I think maybe the better way to look at it is that, you've got a set amount of project. Let's just assume we're there now at 11.7.
Okay.
Anything above that within a percentage change has to come back for approval and explanation as to what's going on.
Somewhat of, I guess I would view that as a cap.
Yeah.
If there is some type of a dollar figure set, and anything in excess of that would need our approval?
I'm just not sure, and I'm not the engineer and know where things are being bid at today. It's a matter of, once we get, I think, as we go through this summer and we know more, I think Ron and I have talked about the expenditures, and we feel that we've got, a conservative number here, meaning that it's high. But I really don't think you're going to know that until you get into this project. And then if the revenues don't grow, then there's no discussion to it anyway, because we're not issuing the debt for a higher amount. But
There will be a point in time in this process where additional approval is required by the council to initiate the contract and the transfer of revenue to the Port Authority. At that time, you're going to know what the size of the bond transaction is.
Yeah.
So you will essentially have a veto on whether or not you're proceeding with the transaction at that point. This TIF authorization does not commit you to use these revenues for this development if you choose to annul it. It's your choice up until the point at which you enter into a contract where you're assigning revenue and somebody's relying on it. At that point in time, the bondholder requires the municipal's performance.
But we are entering into that development agreement contract next month?
I think it's a development agreement, not the actual, what Caleb is discussing is the point in time when we have to go to the Port Authority.
Correct.
To authorize the resolutions and the intergovernmental agreement that would transfer the revenues over to actually issue the debt. At that point in time, yeah, we're going to know what the costs are.
Okay.
And that, the development agreement is not forcing you into making a commitment to that at this point in time.
The council will be required to pass a resolution authorizing the Montgomery County Dayton Port Authority to issue the debt.
Okay.
So you'll know then what that size of debt will be.
We're kind of into the TIF at that point, though, aren't we?
Well, the first reading of the TIF is in July, second reading is in August. My guess is we'll be going to the Port Authority by the end of August
And
versus...
they're two separate things. I mean, you've got the
Right.
TIF, which is this year, and then you've got the actual transfer of revenues, which is later for the bond issue.
Okay.
I mean, I see the confusion maybe there with the development agreement, and that you're getting into this development agreement saying you're going to do X, Y, and Z. But I think also obviously if costs come back and it's completely unexpected higher, then you've got some other issues, and you're probably not moving forward with it.
And I would also advise you that you always have the authority, until such time as the municipality has entered into a binding contract with respect to the revenue, to terminate the TIF. It's your ordinance, it's your law. So if you choose to repeal it, that's your choice, it's fine. I've done that many times where the project did not pan out, and so you repeal the TIF in order to set things back to square one.
I just want to make sure everybody on council still understands, and and even the audience, I'm not speaking against this TIF. I understand how it works. I'm in favor of this development in general. I'm just looking for some of these details.
Yeah.
And it's because it's my understanding that in a general situation, we're the ones issuing the bonds and paying the bonds back. It would kind of go along with that, that we would be very responsible with our own money to make sure that it's being spent wisely. And that by no means is an insult towards our developer, Ron, but there's very few people that I would hand my credit card to and say, just keep it under a limit. And so that's my personal equation to this, that trust is one thing, contracts are another. And contracts keep things clean, and we know what we're getting, we know what we're paying for, and we know what we are being supplied with. That's what's driving my questions here this evening, is I need to see those details of
Yeah.
what we're getting, what we're paying for.
I hear you. I just don't think we're at that point in time yet to have all that.
Okay.
You know, and if you recall, when we talked about the TIF the first time, Caleb's going to have the fun of drafting all these documents, and the devil's in the details in terms of the flow of funds, how it works with the bond documents, how it comes back to the village.
Okay.
And so that's coming along. We don't have that done right now, obviously, and then that's going to start the process with the bond issue. And so you're going to get a lot of your answers as we start working through those logistics well before you even authorize it to officially happen.
Okay.
So there, as Caleb has mentioned, there's an awful lot of points in time when you can say, no, don't think so. This, you know, these costs aren't what we said it was going to be, or this development isn't what they said it was going to be, to have that point.
Okay. I just have one more.
I don't believe you.
So I'm understanding I'm going to kind of go back to the home valuation price, or maybe even better just to talk about the total project price. And I see overall the total project price is roughly the same, 71.2 to 70.3. What can keep that from falling any lower? I don't want to I don't want it to sound as though I'm against $180,000 homes compared to 215 to 300s. I think $180,000 home is great. I'm not knocking any price valuation. But when this was first brought to us, it was the idea that we were going to be offering something that Milton didn't have. And we were actually told that we were going to be offering something that was desired in West Milton. So seeing that slip from the 215 to 300 down to 180 gives me concern of, can it go to 160? So where is that bottom? Where will this model no longer work? Because that's really only in my eyes, that's really the only guarantee we have that keeps that home price from slipping down farther and farther. Again, I'm not making any detrimental remarks of a $160,000 home. That's wonderful, and I believe our median home price is what, 115?
Well, the median sale price right now currently is like 104.
Okay. So by all means, it's still a nice improvement over what our average is, but what keeps us from sliding any further if costs can be, let's say for whatever reason, costs come in lower, and we're looking at a debt structure of 8.2 instead of 11.5. Well, that kind of opens up the door for less of a need for tax revenue to pay back the debt structure, so therefore a $160,000 house could be built instead of $180,000. That's not what we were originally looking for.
Yeah.
Where is our assurance that we're getting what we're looking for? The 180 auditor's value, not a sale price, because I believe that would be an auditor's value that you're running through your model.
Yeah. That's not a finance guy question.
Okay.
It's you know, it's a developer question, and it really kind of what the market's gonna bear, and that's.
When we first started talking here, I didn't know who was going to be our builder.
Mhm.
I have a relationship with Ryan Holmes.
Mhm.
And so we met with Matt, we met with the school board. They opened the door and they got interested, okay? So as a developer, I guess I have some control over them. But at the end of the day, it's your decision, okay? We're putting all this infrastructure in here, and we have to have enough revenues to pay for it. And if we can't, if we don't have enough revenues, I have to pay for it, okay? So I want it up there too, okay?
Right.
At the same time, we do have to have absorptions, because our retail users, they want people living there, okay? That's what gets them attracted to come live there, okay? I made a promise to Matt that we didn't want to cannibalize businesses, or we're hoping that by attracting people from other communities outside of West Milton, that we create a demand for other houses, and the housing average price actually goes up throughout all greater West Milton, and that'll help the schools out. Ryan Holmes will be at the next meeting on the 11th, I think it is. So we've invited him to be here. You can ask him that question at that time. I don't have a gun to their head. They have given me a contract. I haven't signed it yet. I'm not going to sign any contract until we get all this worked out.
Sure.
And I'm certainly hoping that our overall infrastructure cost comes in a little less, because I am not going to not put the nice entrance gates and hiker biker trails and landscaping and all the nice things we're looking for. We have to create a destination place, and it's going to take money to do that. While I get the mic, I want to speak to the water tower deal. Matt and I have been talking, and we figured that we're going to be able to charge each home, each business enough over time that we can pay back the water tower and pump stations. So I put together a pro forma on that. You just got to be patient with me to give me the right to get the engineering done, so I'll get all the final costs done. But if these guys don't, if we don't get the TIF agreed upon, then there's no point in me going any further. So does that make sense? Without the TIF, we're not going to go.
And I understand you need the TIF, and I want to give the TIF to you, but I need to make sure that the TIF protects the village as much as it protects you. And I think in a good negotiation, both people walk away from the table with a good deal. I'm not looking to short you either financially or add additional responsibility. From the beginning, we had requested that we didn't have the financial responsibility from this project, and you took that on, and I think that's wonderful. That was one of the biggest concerns that I had starting out with this project several years ago. So I applaud you for that. I'm just looking to find that protection for the village as well, and this sliding home value is a concern of mine right now. And so that's not a price that you can control, that's something that Ryan Holmes controls. And is there anything that controls them from dropping that price lower?
Well, I haven't signed a contract yet.
Right.
So let's get through the TIF language, get all the real cost numbers into you, and at some point in time, we'll go ahead and exercise our contract or not, okay?
Your contract with Ryan?
With Ryan, yeah.
But that's having us approve a TIF, and once we approve a TIF, our control over the project begins to lessen. I understand that we have times later on down the road to exercise or repeal a TIF, but we're getting pretty deep into the process at that point. I'd rather know what some of those guarantees are for us going into this. I'll give you the scenario that I had thought of. Our CRA currently gives $250 and above is an 8-year abatement for a residential home, and $250 and below is 4 years. If 180 is the bottom of what you need for debt service, And if 180 is the bottom of what we're trying to provide for the community, then is there a way to structure the TIF where 180 and below gets a 15-year TIF and 180 and above gets a 30-year TIF to provide an incentive to put in the $180,000 homes? Our CRA is worded in such a way. Again, I'm not trying to short you or short, but I feel as though there needs to be some way that that home value price can't keep falling.
Unfortunately, once you're issuing the debt, you can't come back and change the term of the TIF.
I'm talking about it being in the TIF from the beginning. If
Yeah,
our CRA has a sliding scale of abatements based on valuation, why couldn't the TIF be written in the same way, where
Yeah.
valuation determines the length of the TIF?
Because then a bondholder
incentivize.
is not going to come in and take that risk. If something that they could be at risk for something they're not doing, they're not going to come in and say, okay, yeah, we'll take that risk if something would happen in the market outside of the developer's control. Say you have another fiscal crisis hits, they're not going to be the ones willing to take a 30-year, a 15-year hit to their TIF revenue where they may not get paid back.
The result being that they will simply assume that there's only 15 years of revenue.
That's correct.
Forever.
Okay.
Yeah.
But isn't there a bottom to this, revenue figures
So-
that you're giving us to
so-
make this work in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I can go down and see what dollar amount it takes to what house value for that piece to show where we're at a 1-to-1. But that's not what's going to sell.
Right, and
I mean, I
that's,
can get to another scenario and say, hey, run this model and see what that value of that house needs to be in order to theoretically get the bond sold.
a bond buyer,
Correct,
if I'm
yeah.
saying this correctly, would not be interested in a 1-to-1. I get that. So he's going to want to see that there is a home price that can support these tax revenues. Am I following this correct?
Yeah, keep
right?
in
So
mind
he-
that's just a percentage of the overall revenues that are paying this back too. So the housing sector of this is not, it's not all housing.
Correct.
It's just a portion of the revenue mix that pays off the debt. So, I mean, that's why, I mean, you could have several different scenarios. In reality, it would occur where other valuations might increase, the home values might decrease for whatever reason, and you still be fine with the bondholder in terms of a coverage factor.
I might be able to add a little bit to the home value discussion.
Okay.
Just, this is just more experiential. It's, I've probably been involved with 15 to 20 projects with Ryan Homes, but I've never represented them. So I'm not here to speak on behalf of Ryan Homes. In fact, I've negotiated hard contracts on the other side. But developments aren't, here's the $180,000 homes. They're all going to be $180,000. Here's the $200,000 homes. The whole home building industry has become pretty sophisticated where a $180,000 home can look the same as a $210,000 home. So ordinarily, what a developer does to try to maintain standards is they set the design, the types of homes that can be built in the development. So you say, the Soraya A farms homes will be built, and this type of home, they all have pretty names. They're all sorts of different homes. Within those homes, though, there will be some that are going to come in below $180,000. They are very, very good at going to that consumer who wants that nice-looking home but wants to save costs, and they usually save it by internal costs. But what they'll be able to tell you is that on average, so there'll be some that will come in at 175, there'll be some that come in at 240, and they'll look very, very similar. What we can probably do in our contract negotiation is come up with certain types, certain designs. We can't stranglehold them to say you can only sell $180,000 homes.
I understand.
And be able to come back and suggest these are the design standards that we're looking at, and then you can look at it in terms of saying that, okay, well that, those would on average come in at that amount. So that's ordinarily how that process works, including in other TIF-related projects that I've been involved in. I don't know if that's helpful, but I wanted to add a little bit of context to it.
It is. I guess the bottom line I'm getting to, so your bond buyer, he has a floor of what these homes can be worth, or what the total project can be worth. because he's not wanting a 1-to-1 debt ratio.
Right.
So if there's a floor, why can't that be described in a number and guaranteed in a number?
I think he just, isn't that within the contract that it would be with the developer and Ryan Homes?
It would be a design-based standard that
Yeah.
that you'd ordinarily have, and then the assumption is that under that design-based standards, they're going to come in within a certain price point. But in terms of, I'm not exactly sure how you'd go about.
I've not seen it within a bond document where somebody's guaranteed a value of a home.
Okay.
Yeah,
There's a policy reason behind that as well. Man's home is his castle. A lot of government likes to stay out of the valuation of price in exchange for a home. That's a lot different story on commercial property. This
Okay.
deal,
Correct.
there'll be commercial assessments that are pegged to an assumption of what the value would be on the site in order to produce a sufficient amount of assessment to pay the debt service associated with that value. So over on the commercial side, that's the type of agreement where a municipality can get in there and say, this building really should be worth 11 million, and we're gonna base the assessment on that amount. And that's a deal that can be done. On the residential side, it does get a little odd when the municipality is starting to suggest home values, because that's typically outside of most policy conclusions that folks make in town hall. From my
Okay. I understand not wanting to set a home value price for a developer. That's where the idea of incentivizing them with a different TIF length, you've explained that. Could it be done through a matter of, there have been developments in town that have minimum requirements on siding or square footage or roof pitch, things of that nature that basically then determine the valuation of the home? Because if you're working with $100 a square foot and we're wanting to see 180,000 and above, you require 1,800 square foot homes as a minimum. That's something that could be worked out with Ryan Homes in your individual contract with them?
Yeah, just so we're looking at it again, just perspective-wise, we want to have the best, most expensive homes that the market can demand. That's what in our interest. At the same time, it's in no one's interest, because I've been involved with developments like these where you try to put in a product for which there's no demand. But we want the maximum price that the market will demand. That serves us the best as well. Because Ron will be, the buck will be stopping with him. But at what you'll see in a lot of these contracts is minimum square footage, and then there will be designed requirements. Like, it has to be these sorts of designs, and that's how we protect ourselves. I mean, if Ryan came in theory and said, you know what, let's try this, terrible new product that we think suckers will buy at a real quick pace, so we can make a quick buck, we're then messed up on the phase two. So
Right.
we will put in, and I say this not even for the protection of you guys, but for our own protection, we will have standards of what has to go in there, and usually it's tied to a particular type of design that they have that then has a lot of affiliated details with that design. Like, it will be, the Alpha B model and those sorts of things.
Right.
But there would typically be minimum square footage. The other thing we're going to have, because Ron and his team want to have a first-class development, we're also going to have declarations of restrictive covenants that not only protect this development at the construction phase, but moving forward, you can't alter these homes in a way that's not appealing. It's going to have size standards. It's going to have design standards. I probably should have pointed this out earlier. Ryan is going to have to live with what's in our declaration of restrictive covenants. And they're going to be quality documents. I've done lots of these over the years, where they can't build anything or that varies from those. They can't be altered in a way that varies from those. And they'll be, self-regulating in that regard. So that's another document that we'll be sharing with Matt and your team to add additional qualitative protections, which don't go to a set dollar amount, but you can usually look at those.
Yes.
You can then usually look at the contract and say, it's just not feasible that under these standards you can put in a whole bunch of $130,000, $140,000 home. My first home cost $72,000, so I too have no objection to lower price homes, but for the purpose of supporting bond revenues, I understand your issue there, but that's ordinarily where the protection falls. It's the Declaration of Restrictive Covenants. What do they mandate? That's a recorded document, so that's placed of record. And then what's our contract with Ryan Homes say in terms of adding a little more detail to that?
But we can't expect to see that type of declaration from you guys until after we enter the TIF agreement?
I think that you will have still you'll be at a revocable stage, I believe, and you will have seen that. So you could say, Dave Reed just drafted the worst declaration of restrictive covenants I've ever seen. Unless he makes something better, you're going to call Caleb, and he's going to call me and say you got to change that, or we're going to revoke the TIF. So there would be oversight. It would not be a situation where we would be typically presenting those to you. It would be more that they'd be running through Matt. You guys would be able to look at them and revoke the TIF if they're not of adequate standard. That would be the ordinary course.
Just one note on why we're doing TIF now. There's a lot of timing that's required by the revised code for TIF. It requires a long period of time in advance of the bond transaction being capable of being consummated. So in the regular world, without the General Assembly, we might be doing, a business deal where these parameters are laid out. But because of the strictures of the code and the requirements for notices and hearings, we do have this stretched out process, which does, in order for us to get to a closing at September, October,
Right.
we have to be here now about this. So,
Okay.
so, you know.
I'm done now.
I also have a quick
Thank you.
question about the housing. So along with those guidelines that you would be giving us, would there be an example, like a picture example of what style of home? I know we've seen some, but for sure, idea?
We can, there would be yes, we can, for one thing, just out to satisfy aesthetic interest, we can provide that. But also in the restrictions, a lot of times there will be attached drawings showing what can and can't be built. What you're gonna see is during the course of the process, there would be the designs for the homes, but equally important, there's going to be a design, a site plan for the entire site. And the reason I say that's equally important is the Declaration of Restrictive Covenants aren't going to be just limited to the homes. They're going to have standards for maintenance of the entire community, how it's going to be kept up. It creates a scenario where there's an association that's charged with keeping everything a certain way, keeping the aesthetics up. But there will be an architectural element of that, and that's really what you're getting at, which sets forth the architectural expectations. Ron and I haven't had this discussion yet, but a lot of times there's an architectural review committee on the association that's actually charged with making sure nobody deviates from those standards. And I don't know, that we'll probably have something like that in there, I would think.
I'd like to say something here. When Matt and I have been talking about this for some time, and we met with Ryan Holmes, I wanted to make sure council, zoning people, members could come out and see an example. And so we did have a meeting that some of the council people came out. And that was my test to see what council thought. I based those TIF performance off of those numbers and given them to Andrew so he could make sure that we had enough revenues to amortize the bonds. And but David will get heavily involved with the Ryan contract. He'll be here at the next meeting on the 11th, so will Ryan Holmes. And that's your opportunity to discuss it.
Question concerning this whole general topic here, and I don't know, this might be a question for Lene. Are any of what you guys are talking about, the performas that you guys are going to have the contract with Ryan, is that going to be included in the PUD language at all? Is that going to be, so would that be part of the, because I know the PUD had like specifications for the residential areas. Is that going to, that detailed language going to be included into the PUD, or is that going to be just in the contract with Ryan? Do you know?
It's been a while since I've looked at the PUD.
Okay.
But I don't think as specific as their contract.
Okay.
That specific language won't be in our PUD.
Thank you.
That's ordinarily the case. Is the PUD gets pretty specific in terms of site development type issues and, you know, even lot sizes, setbacks, what the infrastructure is going to be, what the public amenities, what the private amenities are going to be, in terms of building materials, those sorts of things. Ordinarily,
Okay.
those are not, you know, that ordinarily doesn't get down to that level in PUD. Usually you are, I'm not judging this, but normally you're somewhat relying on the quality of the developer for putting in quality your declarations. But in a cooperative arrangement like this, we're going to be sharing with you what it is we plan to do in terms of the declaration, which then does somewhat fall on the developer to enforce. It's very hard to get into issues of colors and those sorts of things if you're on kind of where you guys are sitting. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Caleb, could you take, there's one other, he was talking about all the things that we have to go through till we get to the end, and one of them's the economic development plan. We've not talked about that.
Sure. There is a requirement associated with the incentive district TIF, so the residential TIF. The General Assembly essentially has suggested that municipalities need to have an economic development plan associated with the infrastructure for an incentive district. That's essentially an extra, it's an extra layer of diligence that the General Assembly is saying the municipality must undertake. What is entailed in the economic development plan? It's essentially the infrastructure plan for the site, and the council approves the general terms of the infrastructure plan. It does not get into absolute scrutiny and specificity about linear feet and the placements exactly of each road and curb cut, and nor would anybody want it to. You need a bit of flexibility as land development occurs. But the economic development plan is an element, it's a required element that the council must pass before adopting the incentive district TIF ordinance. So is that in their materials already?
Yes.
Yes. And when will that will go forward for?
That's typically, if there was an order of legislation, that's typically the first one that you would do. And then and that's typically a resolution. And then you would have the first readings of both TIF ordinances, the commercial and the incentive district, and also a first reading of the plan itself or the rezoning of the property.
Okay. So in reading through that, you know how I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I have lots of questions and comments that I've written down. So because some of the figures just don't add up. For example, it says the anticipated new phase or subphase be opened every year, starting with approximately 20 residential units, opens to each of the first through the 7th year. So that's 140. And then the additional 12 units open to the 8th year, that's 152. And I think that's what we originally started at, was 152, and now we're at 132. So if we have comments in reference to this, can we send them to you? Because this is something that needs to be finalized for our review and approval at the July 11th meeting, is that correct?
And it can be read but not approved. If there are mistakes like that,
Okay,
then they could be corrected, as long as we pass the economic development plan.
okay. So if we have comments in reference to this, we can just go ahead and send them over?
Send them to me, and if there's some corrections that need to be done, I'll probably send them on to Caleb.
Okay, all right, sounds good. Very good. Thanks. Okay. Council, any more questions or comments?
Hey, Matt, the packet that you stated that we'd get on Thursday, is there a way that could be made public also?
Sure.
All right.
Caleb, I do have one more question.
I'm going to sit for this one.
I know, sorry. Well, some people might have this question also. So originally, we were going with school approval. We're now not.
Mhm.
So how is this affecting the school, and what's the outlook for them now?
Well, generally, the nature of both of these TIFs, the TIFs themselves do not redirect the school's taxes. So when the fund is populated with money from the county auditor, there is an obligation of the municipality to pay the schools everything they would have gotten. So the schools will be kept whole as to the TIFs themselves. There are abatements associated with this site, and really the brunt of the impact on the schools will be in the nature of the 4-year abatement. To the extent that that is abating of school district taxes, that will happen for a short period of time for each home. And then, of course, that will wear off, and then the TIF will be paying the schools everything they would have gotten in years when the abatement's not in effect. So that's essentially the key impact on the schools overall. Previously, there was discussion about a broader arrangement where the schools would participate every year for 30 years, and shortening it down to the 4-year period was the better arrangement according to the policymaker.
Okay, thanks.
Very good question. Okay, anything else before we open it up for public comments and questions? Okay, we're going to open it up for public comments and questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand, state your name, so we have it for the record, and where you live, and we can proceed. Anyone have any comments, questions, concerns? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question.
Could you please stand, state your name and where you live?
Hi, I'm Katie Waddell, and I live out on Davis Road in West Milton. And I just have a big question about how the schools are going to accommodate all the new potential kids coming into the system. I mean, I know at the other meeting they weren't anticipating a lot of students, but I have a kindergartner that will be going into school, and he's got a 50% chance of being in a class with 2 classrooms combined right now. So obviously the school is already having some concerns with managing their space, and I just want to know, like, has anybody thought of the repercussions of that with the students in the school, and how we're going to accommodate that for our kids? Because I don't want my son to be in a classroom with 38, 42, 46 kids. So, and he's got a chance of being in a classroom with 38 students now, going into kindergarten. I mean, obviously there's going to be 2 teachers, but still that's a lot of stimulus for a kindergartner, in my opinion. So, how is that going to, has anybody thought of that? The repercussions of what our kids are going to be facing?
Who wants, you want to start first, Jason?
Oh, go right ahead.
I mean, that's just been my big
Yeah.
concern the whole time. It's
Sure.
like, I mean, I want a good school district for my kids, that's why I'm here, so.
Right. We're concerned with that too. That's one of the things that probably all of us here have school-age kids. I have 2. One has 2 years left and the other one has 7. And that is concerning. I know that what was communicated to us from the school was roughly they have 170 open enrollment kids, and they have 70 kids that enroll at other schools.
Right.
So that's a difference of roughly 100. So I don't know, I can't speak on behalf of the school as far as where their capacity is at, and what additional kids they could take on above that open enrollment amount, if they would have to kind of scale things back from the open enrollment amount and not allow as many open enrollment kids. I can't answer that. I know what was communicated to us at our joint meeting that we had back in April, but
Well,
I
I
know-
talked with the superintendent, so, but there really wasn't a lot of planning, I don't feel like, or a lot of.
Here's something to think about.
I mean, and I'm not trying to like
This
throw
is-
you under the bus. I
This
know,
is
you're
your,
here.
this is your meeting, so I don't want to step on anyone's toes, but you want me to field this one?
I just wanna
Sure,
know-
sure, I'll speak up.
Sure. Please do.
If you're comfortable in this setting, I do want to keep it at that,
Well, that's okay.
we
I'm not
can't really
trying to-
answer some of those questions. I'll speak as far as Scott as well, that it's a concern of mine personally. I as well have kids there. As far as the actual official answer from the school, if he's comfortable answering tonight, that would be wonderful. If not, you would have to attend a school board meeting.
Well, I will. I just didn't want to put anybody on the spot. but I
Might
want
even
to.
just invite you to make an appointment.
I have talked with you multiple times, so, but I just wanted to see if anybody on this board had any thoughts about it, or if they were concerned about any kind of repercussions.
And I would like to say, here's something to think about. So the first year, the number of homes we have, what, is 20?
I believe
Being-
so, yes.
being
I
built.
don't have the figures in front of me, but I think it is, it's either 20 or 30.
Now, you have to think about when kids are moving in, which is not gonna be a kid for every home that's school age. You know,
No, I
there's gonna be
understand that.
preschoolers, and they're gonna be spread out throughout the school. I mean, they're all not gonna be kindergartners or all first graders, so I honestly can't see it making that huge of an impact just on the elementary alone or the high school alone, because, well, you know how you
Well, yeah,
space your kids out.
hypothetically, but
So,
you
and then
can't.
in the long run, I mean, kids are then graduating, and I don't know, but I would love for Dr. Ritchie or, yes.
I know the last person you guys expected, but I saw you were still here tonight after I was listening to you for an hour. My name's Fred Francis. I used to live on 721 DeBron Road. I now live over in Dayton, in case anyone didn't know that. I moved due to a divorce, so that's why I left here. One thing that the city council won't say, what I'll be more than happy to say is, if those 100 kids come from inside the school district to go to the school, that is actually more money for the school district.
Yep.
Because that's more money they're gonna get from the state of Ohio
No, I understand that.
and so forth. So when you're looking at, they have about 170 kids that come open enrollment. They're looking at maybe 7 houses per year to get filled up. All right. Now, when you're looking at 7 houses on average at other developments that we've looked at, I'll say I've looked at because I'm no longer part of city council for the last couple of years. 2 out of those 7 had school-age kids. Out of those 2, 3 kids. So if you're looking over a long term of 30 years, you're talking maybe 3 to 6 kids per year to be included into that. If you've got already 100 open kids, it'll take you probably 10 years to even get half of it filled. So the school, in regards to having it, should be expecting to have a semi-slowly increase, but over the next 10 to 15 years, should be able to pool from the school district so that they do not have to go outside of the school district to bring kids into the school to be at the level where they're at. And I have 4 school-age kids that still live in this district, from 2nd through 8th grade. So I was very concerned about that as well, to the point where when I'm looking at it, and I understand they're looking at that, that comes to spacing as well, as far as how to rearrange it, which I believe the school's been doing a great job.
Oh, yeah.
Putting the 5th grade and changing it, because that was a lot of fun telling my 5th grader he had to get up earlier. Not really, but they got over it. So long-term, I think that's a school issue. Again, I'm not talking for the lowly 7 individuals up front in there, but that's where they come to. And again, the school's gonna get a lot more money by having them in the school district than outside of the district.
I understand that. I guess I just wanted to make sure that the board was taking into consideration what potential repercussions could be
Yeah.
happening though. Because just what,
Yeah.
I mean, we're facing now with my kindergartner going into kindergarten, might possibly be in a class of 38 students. You know,
And that's when you gotta look at
I mean,
how many
obviously there'll be
houses.
2 teachers,
We
but-
did that on purpose.
I know
We-
you
we
did.
feel like
And
that.
those 2 teachers
I'm not-
are amazing,
I
so
understand.
you don't have to
I
worry.
do. I mean, I guess I'm not trying to fault anybody. I'm just saying that right
That's
now.
what's really
this
gonna
is
come to
what
look
we're
at,
seeing.
how many homes are they gonna be able to build and realistically get every year?
No, I
And-
understand.
And that's what's
true.
gonna take about 10 years to fully develop that entire area. And that gives the school district plenty of time to develop that. So it's not gonna be like one bam, we got 150 new homes.
Right. No, I understand that. I mean,
And it's
So-
just like the kids that are coming in that may move out there, open enrollment will go down. They won't let kids come in on open enrollment because they'll make an adjustment for the kids that are currently going to be living.
Hey,
Okay.
part of they is here.
Yes, ma'am, and I'd like to just hopefully close the loop with your question. Before we even move forward, when the decision was made that the school TIF was not going to be a reality.
Right.
And we decided to go forward with this plan, we talked about this a
So
lot.
was it
And it was
concerning?
very, it's very concerning to all of us, because every one of us up here on council, except for one,
She's got grandchildren.
but she's got grandchildren, have kids, we have kids growing up that are in the school district, so
Well, that's all I
it,
wanted to know.
it is,
I
it
have
is a
three.
concern of
I have
ours.
3. Moved across the state to be here.
I just wanted to know that you all, as a board, took into
Yes.
consideration what
Yes, ma'am.
most parents are taking, are concerned about.
If you want to know something that keeps me up at night, that's something that I think about with this development every day.
Okay, good.
So-
That's all I wanted to know. So I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot. I just wanted to know. And I know that the kindergarten, it was designed this way, that you're doing this specifically this coming year. So I'm not judging it. I'm just saying that I do have concerns about that as well.
Okay, if we can, we'll move on to any other questions that anyone has in reference to the TIF or the development. Yes, ma'am. Please state your name and where you live.
I'm gonna read mine because I don't do good off the cuff, and I thought a lot about what I wanted to say. So, my name is Deborah Miller. I live at 59 Donna Jane Court here in West Milton. And I've got allergies, so I'm sorry, I'm a little froggy, so bear with me. I just wanted to take a minute to thank you guys for the wonderful work that you're doing on behalf of the community. You've shown a great amount of thoughtfulness and forethought in looking at the proposed development project for the community, and many people have noticed the work that you're doing. I always hated it when old people say things like, "I remember when," but I'm going to do that. So, I can remember when I bought my first home. I was thrilled, I was excited, and I was scared to death. I remember thinking that I would never have another new dress. And at the time, I really believed that. But of course, I did get new dresses. I got lots of other things. And my house payment at that time was $86 a month. So it sounds kind of silly now, right? But at the time, it was terribly, terribly scary. I'm telling you all this because the stuff that you're working on now is very much the same as when I purchased my first home. It's thrilling, it's exciting, and it's very, very scary. It would be wonderful if we all had that crystal ball that would give us all the answers that we need to all of our questions, and we could see into the future and know exactly what we should do. But it isn't like that. And all the wonderful things that we get in life always come with a little bit of risk. You gotta take a risk. You guys are asking the right questions, you're doing the right research, and you're doing everything that you should, but you're never gonna get guarantees. And I'm sorry, Jason, I know it would feel so good just to know. Those were great questions, and I'm glad you asked them. But there's not going to be those 100%. It just isn't there. I can guarantee there will be glitches. There will be surprises. You know, I was involved in a building, just a building, not a development. And the things that came up that we never dreamed of was unbelievable. And the surprises and all of that stuff. But it all worked out really, really well, and this will too. A little side note, I know that you guys will hear, I call them the 1950s wannabes. So you're gonna hear from some folks that wish that West Milton would never change, that it would always stay exactly like it is. I would ask you to not listen to those voices. Those are, they're not healthy for the community. And I know that if you're passionate about the community, which I know all of you guys are, it can be tempting to listen because It's people that have been here. It's people we respect and that we honor. But they're stuck in a point of time. You talked about this is a snapshot of this point in time, and that's all that is. Most of you guys know that I served on the council several years ago, and the reason that I ran for council was because we had a council full of people that wouldn't do anything. There was no thought of growth or looking forward or doing anything that would help the village to grow, even the schools, which we want them to grow. But the whole goal was just to keep the status quo. Let's keep what we've got. It's good. We don't need to change it. Don't change it. I left my work, or left the council when I knew that my work was done. We had young, energetic, and bold West Miltonians who were willing to take the reins and begin to lead the way. And that's you guys. So we needed the youth, we needed the energy, and we needed the courage. So now, when the responsibilities of taking that next step into the future feel awfully heavy on your shoulders, I just want you to know that there are a lot of people that are cheering you on. A lot of people are excited about this project. They want to see it happen. And so I want you to know that. They may not say it to you guys, but we hear it. You know, people around town hear it, and it may or may not get back to you. So I just wanted to make sure you heard that from us. In closing, I'll just say thank you for all the hard work that you're doing, and thank you for leading the way into the future, and thank you for staying the course and making this a stronger and more thriving community. So, thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
My name's Alice Martin, and I've lived in West Milton since February of 1977. I'm 77 years old. A lot of times I don't like change, but I've been very encouraged about this new development. We have a desperate need for a medical facility coming in. We have a desperate need for some other things. Is there going to be problems? I'm sure there is. I don't care what you do with your life. I don't care what changes you make in your life. I don't care how old you are or what you're planning. There's always a risk. There's always going to be something that will give you a headache. There's always going to be someone that's going to come and criticize you for what you're doing. As you know, I've probably bothered more councils in this town than anybody's ever bothered before. I've even had it said when I walked into a council meeting several years ago, my God, what have we done now? Alice is here. If there's something going on that I don't like, guarantee you will hear it from me. You won't have to hear it from a neighbor that I said something. You'll hear it from me. If I'm going to go after one of you, you'll hear it from me. I just want to say I have appreciated each of you. I think what you've done diligence, you've looked into things. I love how you're handling things. And if I don't like something you're doing, I'll let you know. But I'm very encouraged by this new development. We need to move forward instead of backwards. And we need to get some new stuff going in this town and get out of being a bedroom community. For crap's sake, I'm past bedroom community, okay? But I'm serious. Everybody, we need to move forward. We really need to take a chance on this. Do we know what's going to happen? Jason, you ain't going to get your actuals. I'm sorry, darling. That just ain't going to happen. You're going to have to just hold your breath sometimes and say, oh, Lord, please, okay? But there is going to be some good stuff. There's probably going to be some problems come up along the way. But you guys are good enough to know how to handle it. You have a lot of experience. You have a lot of people that you can contact. We have an excellent city manager. We have an excellent police department. We have an outstanding fire department. And folks, if we have all this right now, if we don't do something, we're going to lose it all. I'm sorry. So if we want to keep moving forward, let's get this development going and let's go.
Amen,
Thank you.
sister.
Okay, any more comments from the public? Okay, hearing none. First and foremost, I would like to give you four gentlemen all the kudos in the world. Thank you very much for being here and bearing with us to answer all of our questions. I know some of them were probably very tough, but we are trying to do, and I hope you understand this, we are trying to do our due diligence with everything that's involved with this development, because it is huge. Nothing like this has happened in this community for a very, very long time. And unfortunately, you know, we're looking at everything that's involved, risks that are involved, because we don't want to make a bad decision as well for the community as a whole. So I just want to tell everybody, I really appreciate what you've done. Ron, I really appreciate everything you've worked here with Matt and putting everything together for this development. I think it's a great thing for the community. It's something we've needed for a long time. And I guess that's it. Thank you very much for the comments and the questions from the community as well. And I guess this time I'll entertain a motion for adjournment of the special meeting.
So moved.
Second?
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we will take a brief 5-minute break, and then we're going to move into our workshop.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Karen,
we're
she's
waiting
coming.
on Karen. Matt, do I need to call the work session to order?
Yes.
Okay.
That's why whenever I got into the word, I'll just go ahead and email it, so we can share it on Facebook.
All right. Like to call this workshop to order. Roll call, please.
Mayor Fogel,
Here.
First,
Here.
Pop. Here. Miller,
Here?
Rudy. Here. And Tinneman.
Here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, Manager Klein, I will turn things over to you. I think the first thing is the parking in front of yard discussion.
Excuse me, Mayor. Thank you. Just a few things, and actually, well, at the last workshop, I had passed out some sample legislations amongst other communities. I believe the one that we recommended was from
Troy, was it? Or no?
I thought it was Huber or Vandalia.
Yes, and I didn't bring my copy with me.
Anyway, see if
Yeah, I never got those.
you didn't have, I still have your copies. You weren't here, so your copies are on my desk.
Okay, I'll get those from you after
But
the meeting.
right at the end of our meeting, yes, it was right here. We had Pickwa's, Waynesville's, and Lene doesn't tell me who this is from. Anyway, she just gave me another one from Troy.
Oh.
So what I thought was to keep I assumed you wanted to do something about vehicles not being parked on the front yard, okay? Troy's is pretty simple. It just basically says, no motor vehicle shall be parked or remain on any non-parking or non-driveway portion of the lawn of any residential zone lot. So what I thought I would try to do,
That includes the back and side yards?
yeah, in Troy, it's everywhere. This one, and I forgot.
Yes, I do too.
This one says, no automobile, motorcycle, or other motor vehicle or trailer shall be parked or remain on any non-parking or non-driveway portion of the yard of any residential or multifamily zoned lot. All motorized vehicles or their trailers shall be parked, kept only on an improved hard surface such as concrete or asphalt.
I like
like
that
that.
Like
second
having
one
our
better
garage
because it
part.
defines a parking area.
Yes.
Right.
And
What does our current, I wasn't here.
We don't have anything.
We have nothing in our current ordinance that talks to this.
That's why we wanted to broach this subject.
Okay, okay.
So,
That part.
I'm sorry?
What brought it up? Why all of a sudden did you guys want to approach it?
it's one of the things that several of us has noticed driving through town, that people are using their front yards as parking lots. And it kind of detracts from the curb appeal of the city.
Did you ask the reasoning of why they were?
Well, I can guess on the one house that I know that is a problem, that they've literally have 7 vehicles at the house. And 2 of them are parked in the yard.
'Cause they have
And
so-
quite frankly, it just looks like heck.
Yeah.
I mean, it does. It just detracts from the rest of the neighborhood. That's just my opinion now, but that's my personal opinion.
Which we're all entitled to. I believe that's all we're entitled to, is opinions.
Okay.
How will this work with the recreational vehicle law? I mean, well, that actually had to be on a parking.
It has to be on a hard surface anyway.
It's already covered. And would it interfere with, like, if you were building something and you had to move a truck around to the back of the house or whatever, to the side of the house, in front of the house, while the building materials were unloaded? Because, I mean, it really doesn't specify a time period or.
Yeah.
I've seen, and it might have been in some of the other language that I brought copies of, but it had like a loading time. So it was, and I forget now, but 4 hours or something, you know, if you're moving, and some of them that I read actually specified, so if you wanted to park a moving truck in your yard to carry stuff in and out, you could do that, or maybe a time frame.
Or if you're having a large party, you know, I don't know.
I can, and that was another concern that I had was, if you're having a large gathering. A time frame seems appropriate because it puts some type of an expectation.
Because we have a time frame for the recreational vehicles, if I'm not mistaken, it's 72
With
hours.
72
hours.
So I could see if there is a circumstance like that that
The-
happens, but if it's just leaving a vehicle parked there
What-
for days, weeks,
How,
months.
how would that work, though, if you use, how would that work if you used, I mean, if you drive to work every morning, you're moving the vehicle within that 72 hours, but then you're coming home and parking it overnight?
Ah,
I mean, that's what's happening up on Stillwater.
I
mean,
don't
that-
think you would-
They're
It's-
using their vehicles, they're not just parked there for.
Right.
They're not junk vehicles, they're actual real vehicles.
Right, and that's what, I mean, I see it up and down Miami Street all the time, where it's, you know, they're using there's 6 cars in the yard, well, or something like that, but they're using the cars or the yard as their parking lot because they don't have the driveway space for it. So they have, you know, 2 in the driveway and then 3 in the yard, and then they just pull through the yard whenever they leave and come back.
So what's the
time
penalty
frame would it
for
help
this?
with?
If
Yeah.
someone is in violation of this and is brought forward as an ordinance, what's the penalty?
It's a well, this one was from Reynoldsburg. I saw an email, Reynoldsburg. Troy's is a minor misdemeanor and the vehicle is subject to impoundment. Reynoldsburg is a traffic violation of the minor degree. So
Now-
it all depends on, in the back of their code, what their penalties are.
Where do we fall with junk cars as well? Because I guess what I wanted to find first is, what is it that we're trying to control with this? And is it long-term junk cars that we're trying to control, or just daily parking in yards, or week-long parking in yards?
My intention of bringing this forward was to stop people using their front yards as a parking lot.
Okay, so not necessarily
Not-
for
not-
long-term, but the in and out constant
Right.
usage?
Right.
Okay,
Because it's not, if it's an approved parking area, that's one thing, but what I'm seeing is, it's just the yard, and now it's just dirt tracks and stuff like that, that's what brought this forward to my attention.
right. Actual used vehicles, or
Correct.
vehicles that they are actively using, just
Right.
using those as parking spots?
Yes.
Okay, and I see the need to address it. And I think I've said a lot of times in meetings before, I'm a man as his castle type of person, that within limits, or within,
Right.
there's limits to what we should impose on people in their own properties. But to balance that out, there's also expectations that people have living in neighborhoods, and what goes on 2 houses, 3 houses, or right next door to their home. So I think there's a balance of protecting both of those rights, that homeowner's rights and the neighborhood rights. Do we have limitations on size of someone's parking area, or if it's in their front yard? I'm trying to see things, I was trying to think of things that, if our goal is not to have cars parked in the front of houses, which that might be unrealistic because some houses might not have access behind them,
Right.
do we have limitations on what kind of parking surfaces people can have in front of their homes? Or,
I mean, because your yard is your yard, you
Right.
know?
I understand
Yeah,
that,
that's
and
what's
you get
weird.
that.
Yeah.
And what Matt said it best, I think several years ago, I can remember him saying, it's trying to put legislation to help people understand how to live within neighbors.
Yeah.
And
Or within someone else's aspect versus.
true. And
Or just being considerate of your neighbors, you know?
Right.
Just, would you want to look at your neighbor's house with 5 cars? Or would they want to look at your house if you had 5 cars in front of your home, you know, in
Right.
grass?
right,
Yeah.
every day,
Yeah.
right.
And you do hate to put rules on people, you know, I don't like to do that either, but then it's like, it is a hard balance, you know?
That's what I was wondering, like, is there a limit to somebody coming back and saying, well, fine, I'll just make my whole front yard a hard surface and it's gonna become a parking lot? I don't
Nothing, I'm only giving you.
I understand.
Complaints to me, so I asked Lene to do some research, and she gave
Is
me
there-
4 different ordinances to look at.
I don't believe, Matt, because there's nothing in the building code or anywhere else in the ordinances that specify,
Limits the size of the driveway,
yeah,
just that the driveway has to be it has to be
hard surface.
typically concrete, but it has to be a
And
hard
there's
surface.
setbacks for those? I mean, you have to have it set back?
Well, the setback
side
would be the
yards.
house, has to be set back by the front yard by so many feet, depending on which zone you're living in.
Okay. All right.
And I think that kind of gives a range that, the reason I'm getting at that is if somebody has a true need of parking 6 vehicles at their property and they don't have a current large enough driveway to do that in, if they have that responsibility of maintaining 6 different vehicles, and what we're really trying to get away from is people parking in their yard, then they would have the ability to add more parking to their property because we're not limiting that at this time. So they would have that right to enlarge their front parking area into a hard surface and still park their cars. We're not taking away their ability to park a vehicle at their property. We're just doing it in a way that fits the aesthetics of a neighborhood or trying to maintain some type of a curb appeal.
Yeah.
I realize that causes them to incur a cost, but that's a responsibility they have with owning a vehicle.
Sir, you have a,
Yeah, we're just, so are you guys trying to establish an ordinance today, or?
No.
No, we're just
Well,
talking.
just in case, when you guys are looking to the verbiage or whatever, 'cause I know you're looking to adapt, it looks like a hybrid of different cities. You said hard surface, so I'm not in the city, so I don't really care. I'm in the township, and either way, we would love to see a cone truck just sitting out front anyways. But my driveway is a long driveway, and I know there's some towns a long driveway. To make that concrete or asphalt would be like $20,000, $30,000. I would suggest not adapting full Detroit's and at least allowing gravel driveway as well. Because it's still, to me, it's considered a hard surface. That's what my driveway is. Just like I said.
I think hard surface is spelled out, isn't it?
Yeah, so, yeah. so
Dustless,
Of course, if
compacted.
it's not kept up, then I understand that's
Right.
still just as bad, you know, grass is growing through. But if it's a nice gravel driveway, you know, that's being maintained, I would, in my opinion, I would allow that. So I just would maybe think not just asphalt or concrete, because that would be extremely expensive for some people.
Well, currently, under our any new home that is constructed must have a hard surface, as in concrete or asphalt, not gravel.
But an existing home can have gravel.
Existing homes that were grandfathered in prior to that passage of that code, that's correct.
So what about enlarging their current area?
I think that's really the question.
Because I think these people would rather pay a fine than spend $30,000 to put in a concrete slab.
Sure. And I think we're sympathetic to that same thing. I guess what I'm asking, is that grandfathering already covered? Would they not be grandfathered in because they're adding that additional parking after that date? Or is because their home is already established, the entire property is grandfathered in and therefore they could add gravel? I'm asking too much, right?
You're right.
I need to stop.
It's really up to council on how you pass that ordinance.
So we can put it in there that they could add a hard surface or spell out what hard surface means.
I would just ask the question, what is the goal of what you're trying to accomplish? I'm assuming that you're trying to accomplish nice yards with flower beds and shrubs and aesthetically pleasing.
Right.
So I would assume you're really not trying to get an entire front yard under concrete,
Full of concrete or gravel,
asphalt.
yes.
No.
That's kind of why I ask if we had a limit as of now.
Right, well, right now, we're talking about it because we don't have any thing, except for a new home construction must have a concrete or asphalt driveway.
And a little bit that would save a homeowner, to your point, if you had a long driveway in town, which there's not a lot, but there are some, you wouldn't have to add an additional long driveway. If you're just needing to park additional cars, you might be adding 2 or 3 spaces to a parking area, not 100 yards of concrete driveway. That's true. That's true. That's true. But that's where the balance comes in of, you do have a responsibility of living in a neighborhood, and there's a point of, you do have to take care of your property, even if it means spending money on it, because you can detract from the value of your neighbor's home, and that's not fair to them as well. You wouldn't want to lower your average neighborhood home price by $5,000.
I completely agree with that, and I understand aesthetics and everything. I don't want my home as well, and I don't want my neighbor to look like that as well.
Right.
But I just, if people do have 4 adults that live with them in their dual home or whatever it is, and they have 4 cars, if they have limited space to even put those cars anywhere, I mean, what are they gonna do? They can't just not have their cars. So the question is, how do we handle that? How would you handle that situation?
Goes back to, it's their responsibility. I mean, well, there's always on-street parking.
4 cars isn't that many.
It all depends on where you're at. Like on the beach, on Mondays, I have to park in my yard. Because if I'm on the street and the neighbor's on the street, my trash truck will not pick up our trash. Because the road is so narrow, he can't get through. He backs up into the cul-de-sac and goes around town. My trash is still sitting there because I was parked on the street. Okay, when it snows,
Now, how come you can't park in your driveway?
because I've got 3 vehicles. I've got a van for me, my wife, and my child. I've got a work truck, and she's got a car that she drives to work. In the wintertime, when it snows, they're a level 3 emergency. Everyone's forced in their yard. I mean, it's gonna happen. Okay, there's plenty of people out there that have their basketball court in their driveway. Well, if there's already cars out on the road, they slide over in their yard so their kids can play basketball in their driveway. I mean, I'm not saying everyone parks in their yard, and I'm not saying everyone parks in their yard every day, but the people that do park in their yard every day, or like on a Monday, because the trash truck isn't gonna take his trash if he parks on the road. If they could have afforded the gravel, they'd have probably already put it there, because they probably don't like parking in their yard to begin with. And they probably don't like putting their vehicle in mud when it's raining. So if they could afford it, they'd already done it. Because the last thing they're gonna wanna do is rut their yard up. So we'll have to make them put in something else so they can park there.
I understand what you're saying. And I would like to believe that everybody feels that same way and would like to take care of their front yard. I don't always see the property maintenance, and everybody's standards is completely different. My neighbor, she keeps her yard pristine, cuts it twice a week, and she probably looks at my yard and says, "Darn it, Anthony, you need to mow it because it's been a week." So her expectations are higher than mine, and I'm not saying that we need to. I feel the same way about what you're saying, Jason. I don't like to impose rules and tell people how to live, but at the same time, I want to make sure that our community as a whole is looking nice. That as we talk about a new development and trying to attract outside families into West Milton, that as they're driving up and down Miami Street, that they're not saying, "I don't want to move here because look at this house, and look at that house, and that house has 6 cars parked in the yard, and this house is overgrown, and this house, the paint hasn't been painted in 30 years. Those are the kinds of things that I worry about, because as a whole and as a community, I would like to see us continue to move forward, continue to attract outside folks into West Milton to bring us, to keep us moving. And I don't know, I'm not here to pass judgment on anybody if they can or can't afford it, but part of your responsibility as a homeowner is to maintain it, or a vehicle owner is to maintain it. And, that's just part of adulthood.
I think maybe a good way to describe what you're saying, or term for it, is to set some minimum standards.
Yeah.
Maybe not the standards of your neighbor for the maintenance of their yard, but to set some minimum expectations. Maybe a few ideas that people can do also, sliding your car over while kids play basketball. If we can work some type of wording or time frame into it, that's not going to affect them. If you have a truck parked on Monday mornings, you do have the ability to park that truck farther down the road. It doesn't have to be right in front of your house.
You'd have to know each one. I've got
Well,
a neighbor that's got just as many, if not more vehicles.
Okay.
That's also on the road.
What I'm getting at, there are times when I run out of parking at my house and we can park 7, 8 cars on a good day on paved surface. When I need more parking, I park on the street, and if I have to walk a block down the street, that's what I do. It's a temporary situation for me if multiple people are coming to my house. So I do that. It never enters into my mind to park in my front yard instead of just parking my car on the street down the road. And I think as far as a street or snow emergency, I don't see why that couldn't be written in
I'm sorry,
as well.
that's section 2 of every one of these codes. This section shall not apply during times of emergency due to acts of nature or
There you
during
go.
that time.
So if you have a tree down across the road or across your driveway, if there are reasonable expectations, and that sounds like a good outline for it, then those things take effect. Otherwise, it's setting that minimum standard.
So are we able to at least draft something up off of Troy's, and then we can all take a look at it, and then?
Yeah, you might want to attack this the same way you did the RV. We'll draft up some language and then start picking it apart and rewriting it and
Yeah.
have several meetings until you finally get something that you're comfortable with.
Because it'd be good to
Has
get
there
something.
ever been a final on that, on the RV?
Yeah, it's been passed.
So if we could hopefully come up to at least a good rough draft by the workshop in July.
Sure.
Then we could look at moving that forward in
That-
August.
That helps me,
Council meeting.
that helps me out this week, so yes.
Okay, sounds great.
I like that as well, because I think during the camper issue, we had a lot of good feedback from the community, and I believe they even helped shape the final draft of that.
Agree.
And I don't want to come off as though I'm arguing with you. I would rather you see this rough draft, and if you have ideas that can improve it, then by all means, please stay involved with it. I think you can tell from us what our objective is.
Sounds great. Okay, upcoming legislation for the next meeting, lots of it.
Yes, that's why I said you're helping me out. I take a vacation starting this Friday, or actually Thursday night, so you'll be and I'll be off all next week, so you'll be getting your council packet for July 11th this Thursday.
Okay.
Which will include all this legislation. So not having to do a parking one before Thursday, that's awesome.
That's wonderful, good.
One, it would be the economic development plan resolution, which I'll go over again before Thursday to make sure that all the
I'll
numbers.
send you
and
my
everything.
comments that I have, so.
Yep. And then there's going to be a rezoning ordinance, first reading, which is going to have the public hearing for the Stillwater crossings.
Okay.
Remember, what you're doing is you're approving a plan, but you're actually approving the zone. And the zone is going to be 2 different zones, which was approved or recommended by the planning board. It's going to be a PD1,
Right.
which is a residential zone, and a PD2, which is a business zone. Not to confuse you, but you remember the map showed that the commercial TIF includes the senior living.
Mhm.
The zone is only from the medical building over to the corner. Because by our code definition, where people are living is residential. So you're going to be approving a PD1, which includes the senior living, and a PD2, which is the commercial and/or business zone.
Got it.
Okay?
Okay.
All right. And it's just a first reading, and and our code does require you to have a public hearing.
Right.
Okay. And those announcements for that public hearing have already gone out, so we've met the calendar.
Okay.
Okay. And then there are 2 TIF ordinances, which
those-
you should have
we've already
received.
received
Those were
those.
drafted.
Okay. Yep.
I'll be going over all that language with
And that was good that they
Caleb.
explained what the differences were of
Yes.
the two, for the residential and the commercial.
Lene
They're very,
is,
very long.
Lene is looking really forward to reading them all.
I think they were 4 or 5 pages apiece.
Yeah, it's a lot of language. Just scratch out that parking prohibition.
Okay.
And I still, I just want to talk to you if you wanted to do a resolution for Curry or a mayoral proclamation. I'm good either way. So
I would rather
whatever you-
do the mayoral proclamation.
And
Yeah,
I'll get with you, but I won't have that written by Thursday.
Send me what you have and I'll work on drafting something up.
No problem.
Is that cool?
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay, very good, because I talked to Candy before she left and told her, make sure that she knew the 11th
Yep.
to be here.
Okay, that's
So
cool. Yep.
She knows that. I would
And then,
just-
and then I'll be back. I can fine tune it for you on July 10th and 11th.
Okay.
So we'll have plenty of time.
Okay, and then, just council, if you could, please take a good look at that economic development plan, because we talked about that in length, tonight too, with our, discussion. Please take a look at it as well, and send any comments to Matt that you have, maybe by close of business tomorrow would be great, if you can take a look at it, because since he's gonna be taking off on vacation, but I'm sure you'll pick up on some of the same type of things. There was already one correction that was made on the second version that you included, because there were 133 homes in the first one, and then it was down to 132. But some of the stuff just doesn't quite match up to what we discussed
Just make sure you
tonight.
get me your comments so I can have something
Will
by
do.
Thursday.
Will do. I'll get it to you tomorrow.
And then, I'm happy, and I know the rest of the office is gonna be pleased, that we'll have an administrative assistant starting with us on July 10th. Her name is Becky Schaefer. She comes with a wealth of experience in office setting. 18, 19 years in Job and Family Services. She has had some experiences in dealing with difficult people. She always has a smile on her face, and I hope I'm not going to put any words in Ben's mouth, but I think he concurs that I think she's a great choice. I'm really looking forward to her starting. And then during that time of interviewing, we feel that we've found if you remember when we budgeted for what we called a zoning inspector. Technically, we don't have that in our, as a position title. It's actually, when you go through our zoning code, it's actually either called a housing officer or a zoning officer, and that'll technically be her title, but she'll be starting a couple days after that, part-time. I'm already taking notes and looking forward to training. So, and quite frankly, if Ben and I have been talking, the development goes what we anticipate, there's going to be a boatload of work out of the office starting next March or April, as soon as the houses and the construction starts. So my guess is, when it comes to budget time, if everything goes according to plan, we may be recommending that to almost be a full-time, or probably be a full-time position.
Okay.
Because there's going to be a lot of work.
So for the part-time, is it, how many hours a week are you starting her off at?
I'm only starting her no more than 4 hours a day
Okay.
until we
So
get her,
20 hours a
till we
week.
get her feet wet.
Because we only budgeted, what, 15,000 for that position
Something
for the
like
year?
50 or 18,
Yeah.
something like that, yeah.
Do you have her name?
Lacey Reed, sorry.
Are either of these people local?
Lacey graduated from Milton Union, but however, she does live in Union.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure where Becky graduated from. I think Troy. I'm not positive, but she lives in Pea Hill.
Just curious.
Mhm.
What kind of additional work will we be expecting because of the development?
Because we're doing a CRA with an overlay, every house has to have a pre-construction paperwork, which is a boatload, and then inspections, and then a post-construction paperwork. All of that has to be I's dotted, T's crossed to get to the auditor's office. So when we do I wasn't overly excited when the school said, we're going this route, but because I know how much work it is internally, that we have to keep a sharp eye and make sure that everything is done and all the forms are filled out accordingly.
And we have to do that? I mean, that's a responsibility of the village?
Yes, according to our ordinance.
Okay.
Also, Manager Klein,
Yes.
during the installation period specifically, Tim, myself will be doing inspections, water, sewer, street, everything. However, I've found in past projects, it's nice to have somebody on site 99% of the time, even if that means Tim or I are stopping, 10% of the time, to have somebody there taking pictures, watching, means a lot when it comes to how work's performed at times, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's been a concern of mine of if we will need somebody out there to oversee and make sure it's done to your standards. And I say your because I
Right.
would trust whatever you're putting in.
Right.
Making sure that it's not getting covered up.
They would, whoever that person would be versed in what to watch for. I mean, they wouldn't have to be educated in the ways of water and street construction, but just what to keep an eye out for during that particular time period.
Right.
So that Tim or I didn't have to, stay on that project every day, all day.
Right.
The timing
That's good.
couldn't be any better because it gives us the rest of this year to do training, which Ben and I have talked about. So when it really does kick in, construction season next year, she'll be ready to go.
Good.
Thank you.
Oh, July 4th updates is all on you.
Okay, I'll make it real quick so we can get out of here.
I have one thing to add too after you.
Yes, ma'am, no problem. As far as.
I'm sorry,
Oh, go for
I
it.
have one thing I have to add after July 4th,
Oh,
sorry.
okay. With the July 4th update, we met tonight, myself and Joy Beatley, met to talk about the parade. There was a bit of a mix-up with the email, so I guess I'll just put this out to the community. If you did not get a response in reference to your parade submission entry, please contact myself or Joy Beatley, or you can send an email to the village. I know that Joy's gonna be working to get the lineup together and where people will be staged for the parade. So we're gonna continue to work that. The other thing is, I wanted to open up to council. We had talked before, we were not going to ride in separate vehicles as we've done in years past in the parade. I asked Jason on the phone before we came here to the council meeting tonight if he knew of anybody that had a flatbed truck or a trailer or something that all of us could ride in with our family members, or if we just wanted to ride together, what have you. I think we talked about it. That was what we wanted to go forward with, not doing it individually. If that wasn't an option, we could walk and walk with our families. So I wanted to see what everybody thought real quick and then move forward from there. Does anybody know of anyone that has a flatbed truck or a trailer or anything?
What about
I was-
golf carts?
If we could get the golf carts, that would be
You could have
great.
two
Yeah, I like-
people in the back, you know, you
Yeah.
could have
Yeah,
two
I
for
like
the-
it.
I was thinking I could maybe talk to Ty Hissong and
Mhm.
thought that maybe he's got like a hay trailer that we
Yes, I
could
could-
possibly be pulled in the,
I can
in the
ask.
parade on that.
I can ask a few folks, I don't know if they have one or not, but
Okay, well, we need to find out quickly because we need to narrow that
We'll
down
ride on
because,
anything.
because it's a week from today. And, so we want to make sure everybody knows, the main thing is, I'm going to be here at 10 o'clock for the parade set up, to help on this end. Hopefully you can help me out with that.
Yes.
Here at the city building. And if we could just kind of figure out which direction we want to go. I'm fine either way. Let's communicate via email, figure out for sure what we want to do.
Worst case scenario, I'm fine with just walking it. I think that's okay
I'm
too.
fine with that too.
Yep.
Okay. We'll try to get a
I
trailer.
have my arthritic knees will not
Okay.
walk
Yeah.
on
Okay.
that way.
Understandable. So I think that's it with the parade. As far as the 4th of July updates, I'd really like to thank Alan Lay, who's in the audience, and Justin Fallon, because they put together the fundraiser for the T-shirts and the sponsoring of those T-shirts with local community sponsorship and outside the community. So it's great because roughly $3,400 short this year for the fireworks. So that's great. The shirts look awesome. They have a artwork depiction of West Milton, the area, the park, the fireworks, what have you. The front of the white T-shirt is red with the artwork. The back of the white T-shirt is blue with the sponsors' logos, and we'll be selling those for $10 a piece, either pre-sale with the web link that's on our website and WMPA put out today, or you can get them in person at the concession stand area any day down at the park when the park is open for rides and all day on the 4th. So
I think we should all buy a T-shirt.
I'm buying
Wear it in
I'm
the
buying
parade.
Are they
four.
white?
No, I think
Yes,
we
they're
should.
white.
I think we should wear them in the parade.
I'm all for it. Yep.
That's a good idea.
Yep. So I'm buying 4 for my family, so, yeah.
Mayor Fogel, that are on our Facebook page,
Facebook
that
page.
link, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, sir.
If I can, just real quick, if we order it by the 2nd, we pre-order off of the website by the 2nd, they'll be delivered by the 3rd. Is that correct, Alan?
That's correct.
Okay, so if you do order it off the website now, up until midnight on the 2nd, I think is what I saw, you'll get it delivered by the 3rd, and you'll have it to wear on the 4th.
What's the website?
I can give it to you right now. It's West Milton 4th. It's the number 4 th dot ITEMORDER itemorder.com.
Okay, very good.
West Milton 4.
Fourth.
Right? Oh, 4th.
Yeah, it's the
Oh,
number,
spell out 4th?
no, the number 4 th.com.
Oh, I see. 4th. Okay, 4th.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And just know 100% is going towards the fireworks because of all our sponsors that are on
I
those
was
bags.
just looking at.
Very good.
So it's complete fundraising.
Awesome.
Yes. West
Thank you for
Milton
doing
4th
Actually, we have more
itemorder.com.
sponsors that pay for the shirts, so.
Okay.
Good.
So, just so everyone knows, in the community, we will be meeting tomorrow night at 5 o'clock, I believe, here in the council chambers to go over last minute details with the 4th of July. We're gonna have the T-shirt sales. We're gonna have a 50-50 raffle the night of the 4th, where half of those proceeds will go to the fireworks. The other one is I have approximately 8 vendors that will be on the top of the hill on the back part of Washington Street, facing the park. I've met with one of the individuals tonight, and I've talked to the other vendors, so I'm gonna meet with them in the next couple of days, so they'll know where they're gonna be at. We're gonna have things structured a little bit better this year than we have in years past. So, and they've all agreed 20% of the proceeds that they make that evening, they are gonna donate towards the fireworks. So another good fundraiser opportunity, and I think that is it. I just have one question about the park. Has the park board established a day for a ribbon cutting or grand opening ceremony for the new park and the equipment?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet, okay, thank you. When will the park equipment officially be open to where people can go play on it and check it out?
Knock yourself out.
Vice Mayor Miller was playing on it today.
Today.
Wow, all right.
It
No,
looks
it's
awesome.
It's open.
Yeah.
We swept, we actually cleaned it up, swept everything. So there is still work to do, future work to do, but it's open.
Since you brought it up, that's the little surprise I had. Tom?
Look at that.
Oh, very
There it
good.
is.
Nice.
You need to see that
Very
person.
nice.
Wow. Is that gonna remain, oh, that's a live cam?
Yeah,
Or
well, not live.
Recording?
It was,
It's not nighttime.
Tom has a droid he was able to launch.
His
Is
drone.
that
Yeah.
sand?
No, it's
It's
light colored
Playground mulch.
playground mulch.
And phase 2 next year is the rock slide, right?
Yes.
Yeah, looks
That
great.
looks so nice.
That
It
purple and
is-
green color is pretty cool, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
It
nice.
rocks.
I
And
think Jack Scudmore was the one that brought that to the table.
Yeah,
I had the opportunity to be down there with a bunch of kids and a couple parents, and the mother kept saying thank you and loved that red, what you saw in that red, that's a bench, but it's a swing. So she was swinging, watching her kids play, and they loved the colors because we wanted it to be a party atmosphere and sort of
Great.
Mardi Gras, I guess you would want to say it, or Jimmy Buffett, whatever. And the kids loved it, so
Yeah, it's
that was our little surprise at the end of the meeting.
it's fantastic. I was actually surprised at how big it is, how tall it is. It was.
Yeah,
it looks
if
fun.
you climb,
It's
be
a lot of
prepared to be, it's 20 feet in the air. I mean,
Yeah, I think it's up there.
it's pretty, it goes up pretty high.
So as far as the festivities down at the park, the way I understand for Fun Time Entertainment, they're open Friday night, all day Saturday, all day Sunday, Monday evening, and then all day the 4th after the parade, is that correct?
I haven't seen the actual official schedule, so I do not.
Everybody that's emailed me about wanting to know the schedule, I forwarded on to Jack, but I've never been copied on a response, so
all right.
I'm assuming you know more than
Okay,
I.
That's what I was told when talking to Joy tonight, so that's what I assume the times are, so hopefully that's right.
Pre-sale tickets are on sale now at Curry's and Aldrub's, so.
Curry's isn't open.
Or, yes, I'm sorry, I'm used to, Curry's always had it,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, not Curry's, sorry, Curry's.
Owls and Workies?
Scott,
Yes,
are the people you have at the top of the hill?
yes, ma'am.
Are they gonna be there on the first Saturday?
They're only gonna be there on
On
the
the
4th.
fourth, okay.
Yes,
Because
ma'am.
we're
In
still
the
gonna have
evening.
the farmer's markets, I want,
No, they're only gonna be there the evening of the
The
4th.
okay.
Probably from about 4 o'clock on most of them. Yes, sir.
I was planning on having a trailer there before then.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. That's
I
totally
have to
fine.
get it parked before the parade.
Yeah, no problem. That's fine. Okay, I don't have anything
Oh,
else.
there's the schedule.
Oh,
I have one more thing, but Matt, did you wanna?
No,
say-
that was what I wanted to show, was the
Oh.
video.
Okay. Okay, so the last council meeting, I kind of was toying around the idea of having a market day for the kids.
Hmm.
And so Karen and I had talked, and we talked with the vendors too. And we decided to go for it. So we're gonna do 2 of them. We're gonna do one July 15th and one August 19th. And what we're looking to do is bring school-aged kids, so kindergarten through 12th, come to the market, make, they can make whatever they want, keychains, sell cookies, they have to make something. It's free for them to come. They get to set up, all of the other vendors will still be there, but it will help promote, traffic, and grandparents, I'm sure, will come, and the parents will be there, so I already have a couple of kids really excited about it, so I'm gonna try to get that out on Facebook, and I don't know where else we can put that.
We put it on ours and our website, if you give me the information, sure.
But I think that would be really exciting, it'll promote some entrepreneurship. So, the 15th and the 19th.
sounds great. I would like to thank everybody again tonight for all the questions they asked. I mean, it really goes a long ways to show our due diligence and what we're doing to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the village and community with this development. So, thank you. I think that was great. We asked some very difficult, tough questions at times, might not have got all the answers we wanted, but
Never
I
will.
think it definitely shows that we're doing our due diligence with this, so, thanks. I have nothing else. Anybody else have any last-minute comments?
I invited all four gentlemen to, plus Mark Locke and his team of people from Ryan Homes will be here on July 11th.
Awesome. Okay, very good. Yes, sir.
Back to the parking ordinance. We haven't even, you guys don't even follow through with the RV ordinance unless a pissed off neighbor calls and complains. So I guess my thought is, why would we pass any more ordinances until we can follow through with the ones that we have now fully?
We will be.
How?
We just hired a new zoning inspector.
All right.
That's going to be her number one job.
Yep. We took it upon ourselves that we knew that some of the ordinances needed to be enforced. And Matt is the enforcement officer, and he can't do all that on his own. So that's why we decided to put additional funds in the budget to hire that officer that we talked about. And now we have that person on staff starting the middle of July. So it won't just be on a complaint basis anymore. It still will be. People can.
Yeah.
but
Still
they
can
will-
complain.
They still, yeah.
It's, just to add to that, I will say, I've been here a while, I don't know, 20 years it feels like, but it's been, ever since I've come on, the number one complaint that I receive from people on a day-to-day basis, or as I see people in the community. The number one complaint that people have is getting a hold of property maintenance in this town and cleaning things up. And I'm happy to say that we're finally able to start getting something done about it. That's why we're starting to look at individual ordinances, and we put the money behind that request to be able to start taking care of things.
Very good.
So it's not the seven of us saying this has to be done. We're listening to the community at large that wants to see something done.
Yeah, my main thing was, let's make sure things get done rather than pass other ordinances and none of them fully accomplished.
Okay. No other comments? I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you.